Good morning,
Good
everyone.
Morning. Good morning.
Welcome to today's event. Today's event's on preparing for end of life. My name's Catherine and I'm Director of Services at Bowel Cancer UK.
And I'm Genevieve and I'm the Chief Executive of Bowel Cancer UK. And we've got such an interesting lineup this morning in response to all the questions that we put out to the community and said, what would you like to hear about? And so we've built the agenda, today's agenda around that, and you'll see a bit more of that in a minute. But we've got some fantastic speakers.
We've been able to partner with Marie Curie to bring you today's event, as well as a whole load of other brilliant speakers. It's tough content.
Yeah,
let's just put that out there. This is a tough topic to discuss, but at Bowel Cancer UK we believe it's just so important that we have these difficult conversations, because they're conversations that you, our community, are wanting to have, and the people that love you want to have. So it's not going to be all doom and gloom. If you've been to one of our events before, you'll know that Jen and I like a bit of a giggle and often talk about cake.
We do. I can't believe that's the first time cake's come up today.
I know. We have talked about biscuits, though. There was chocolate finger discussion earlier.
Yes, so. That's absolutely right. And crisps.
And crisps.
Yes. So, well, we should have a look at the agenda, shouldn't we?
Well, I think it's housekeeping first. So I've just got a few things just to let everyone know. You will see somewhere on your screen in your controls there's a chat icon. It's a little speech bubble. If you click on that, a chat window will appear. It'll be on the right if you're not in full screen, but if you are in full screen it will appear somewhere and you can move it to where you want it. That's the chat space that we'd love you to use to introduce yourself. There are members of the staff team in that chat box too, welcoming everyone, putting up links to some of the resources that are talked about. It's just useful for you to say hi to everybody, tell us about things you're finding particularly interesting. Comments are visible to everybody, but they don't show on the recording of the event. So if you want to send a private message to staff, you can as well, just by selecting that from the drop down.
Yeah.
Also in the controls at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A icon. And when you click on that, another window will appear. And again, it'll be on the right or somewhere floating, depending on whether or not you're in full screen. That's where we want you to put any questions that you have that cross your mind during the event, questions that you'd like Jen and I to pose to our brilliant speakers. So please try and remember to put your questions in the Q&A box and not the chat, because we don't see the chat, we only see the Q&A box. We will do our very best to answer everybody's questions, but time may be against us because we've got a lot to get through. So if there are any unanswered questions at the end of a session, what we usually do is we ask our speakers offline to come to provide us with some answers, and then we'll send them out to you when we send out the evaluation and any slides and resources after the event. We will be recording today's event and we will be emailing you the link to the recording afterwards. So if you miss something, have to nip to the loo, have to answer the door, the dog interrupts, whatever, you don't panic. You will be able to go back and see the recording afterwards when we've sent you the link.
Yeah.
And there is also obviously the evaluation form that we send out after all of our events. It really matters to us that you tell us what you think of the event, what you liked, what we could have done differently, how we can make our events better. As Jen was saying, not only does that feedback help us decide what content to put into our next event, but it also helps us get funding to bring these events to you. So all feedback welcome, and I think that we will be putting a link to the evaluation in the chat too. So if those of you that like to strike while the iron's hot, will be able to complete the evaluation straight away.
And I always do these things straight away, otherwise I completely forget, but that evaluation will be open until the 17th.
Yes,
so you've got a couple of weeks.
Okay, so now we're going to put your skills to the test. We always like to just ask a couple of questions at the start of these events to find out who we've got watching, how many of you there are, and where you're joining us from. So our first poll question, please, team, will be, where are you joining us from today? So it will be amazing if you could just click to show whereabouts you are. Oh, England have it at the moment.
Bit of Wales there, though.
You're brilliant. Come on, Scotland. Anyone from Scotland, Northern Ireland? We had Hong Kong once, didn't we?
We did, yes. I think that's the furthest.
The furthest.
The furthest that we've had. Okay,
so we're going to show you the results now. Okay, so there you can see the vast majority of people for this session are joining us from England, but we do have somebody tuning from Wales. Borada. Okay, and our second question is how many people are watching? So we know that you might be watching on your own, but you might also have some people alongside you. And then if you have got people with you, it's really nice for us to know who they are, whether or not you're watching alone or whether or not you're with family or friends or partner. So just a couple of seconds there to tell us who you're watching with. Brilliant, thank you, and we'll share those results with you now. Sharing the results with you any minute now. Any minute. Okay,
great,
brilliant.
It's always interesting to see, where people are tuning in from.
Yeah, and who's watching. And again, we think this session may well be one of those. This might be one of those events where a lot more people watch it afterwards. Oh, excuse me, watch it afterwards.
Yes, I think so. And that's why with all of the sessions that we run, we always record them, put them on our YouTube channel. And so you'll see this and lots of other topics on there for people to watch at their own leisure at a time that suits them. You've got a bit
That's not enough cake. What happens when you don't have cake before you start these events?
We should have learned that by now.
We should have learned that by now. Okay, so time to have a quick look at our agenda for today. So we've got lots of sessions coming up for you today. Our first one is around making practical arrangements when thinking about end of life. Then there'll be a short break. We've then got a session on controlling symptoms with, again, one of our brilliant speakers and our own clinical lead here at Bowel Cancer UK. Another short break. Then we have a brilliant real life story around coping with the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis, and finishing up with a session on support and resources for you. So feel free to come and go, pick the sessions that you are most interested in. That's why we've put the breaks in between each one. So hopefully we'll see lots of you at various points during the day.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's enough from us, me and my frog, and, and us and our notes.
Yes, so I think we should move on to our first session.
Absolutely.
As you said, Catherine, this is making practical arrangements, and we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Catherine Millington-Sanders from Marie Curie. Now, Catherine is the National Clinical Champion for End-of-Life Care. So really, really going to be a super session. And she's going to be joined by Dr. Sarah Holmes, the Medical Director of Marie Curie Hospice in Bradford.
So we are bringing you experts today.
Yeah.
They don't come more expert than Catherine and Sarah.
Absolutely.
So good morning.
Good morning to you both.
Hi, thank you so much for the lovely welcome on a Saturday. I'll wait for Sarah.
I am here, but my video is not working. Ah, now it is, I think. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for the warm welcome. Fabulous Saturday. I'm a GP by training, and I work with the Royal College of GPs and Marie Curie as the National Clinical Champion. And Sarah and I love working together as a sort of double act. Just for the record, my favourite cake is probably chocolate or carrot with a nice frosting. My favourite biscuit is a chocolate digestive.
Excellent choices, I have to say.
I'm really looking forward to welcoming the session. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Holmes. I'm Medical Director of Marie Curie and also of Marie Curie Hospice in Bradford. And I'm following the crowd, I'm afraid, because I'm a chocoholic full stop. So chocolate cake. And I'm actually bitterly disappointed to be in the office by myself today with no supplies of chocolate cake. So I may have to remedy that at lunchtime.
I thought so with you. And if we could also warmly introduce some of our speakers, you will find that there are several Catherines today and also several Sarahs. So we might try and, if we forget to do surnames, but we'll ping back and forward. I just wanted to say thank you. First, we've got Howard Greenoff, who is our corporate. I've just got a few notes because I don't want to make a mistake and miss out some of their glowing things about them. So Howard is a corporate head of service who I work with in Kingston for registration, nationality and bereavement in the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. Howard has worked within the public and private sector, delivering bereavement-related services for over 30 years of his career. And he's a member of the London Inter-Authority response to the pandemic and champions the challenge of reducing funeral poverty. Having worked with Howard on some bereavement and end-of-life care work in South West London, he's just a phenomenal force of knowledge, and really very grateful, Howard, to be joining us today.
So we've temporarily lost Howard, so he hasn't heard any of those lovely things that you've just said about him, but we're doing everything we can to get him back, Catherine.
Revive it. Okay, wonderful. We'll move on to Hina. So Dr. Hina Shahid, who is a colleague and fellow GP. So she's a salaried GP and complex care lead in Halfpenny Steps in RBKC. You might just want to help me with what that acronym is, Hina, when you're on. And regional PCN, so primary care network advisor for social prescribing and health inequalities for NHS England and Healthy London Partnership, I'm going to go with, and the personalised care team. She also works in integrated urgent care GP as a clinical navigator for London Central and West and a GP appraiser for North West London. She's a GP tutor from Imperial College School of Medicine. And Hina is a GP with a background in public health and has a clinical interest in frailty and end-of-life care. She works as a GP in inner city London and is an ambassador for several NHS cancer campaigns. She's also a phenomenal force of knowledge that we'll hear on some of the Muslim and cultural sensitivities that are different in, as we know, in a range of cultural and diverse communities. So really looking forward to see what's unique and important for that. I know that Sarah has connected with our Sarah Jones just to make it easy, and I wondered if you wanted to do Sarah.
Yes, so Sarah Jones is founder of Full Circle Funerals. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah. Sarah Jones used to be a surgeon, and I came across Sarah and her team when we used Full Circle Funerals for one of our own family members. She's written a book, Funerals Your Way, which is a funeral arranging guide, particularly for people who wish to express their own wishes or arrange a funeral at the time of need. And certainly from my personal experience, I know that the funerals that Sarah and her team organise are very individualised. So that's our little crew.
And me.
And Catherine. Oh, I'm so sorry, Catherine. So I forgot to introduce Catherine because Catherine's very much here already. But Catherine is also very kindly joining us as somebody with lived experience of caring for somebody and going through the arrangements.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So, should we kick off this exciting panel? So Sarah and myself will be chairing this. And really it's just, we've got some fantastic questions. So thank you very much for both Marie Curie and Bowel Cancer UK for collecting. So the really important part is we wanted to make sure that we were responding rather than what we thought might be good questions, but actually to real life questions that people have posed. So the team have very kindly sort of collected all of those questions that have come through on a regular basis to the nurse sort of question line, and we wanted to sort of then be reflecting some of that back to you. So we're going to go through some of those themes, and our expert panelists are really going to be able to help support us with lots of that information. I didn't know who we wanted to kick off. Did you want to kick off with a question, Sarah, or shall I go for it?
Crack on, Catherine, and I'll join in.
Okay, so if we, I thought if we first maybe came to, and Tina, if I could come to you first, around some of the questions were about actually how do we plan for what matters most, and what are some of the ways that we can actually let our GP know, or our hospital doctor know, or hospice doctor know, if they're not actually asking us. What are some of the ways that you experience that are helpful, and ways of sharing that with other professionals so that they know and you don't have to say your story lots of times?
Thank you, Catherine, firstly, for that really lovely introduction. It's really good to be here. That's a really important question, because fundamentally, when we're talking about end-of-life care or advanced care planning, it's all about looking at what matters most to the patient, in the middle of all of this. And sometimes then we find in lots of different communities that, it may be family, relatives and other people that are very, very closely involved in the care of the patient. What matters to me most is a very core concept in personalized care, and it's about being led by what is important to the patient, so their needs, their priorities, their preferences, what their cultural values and beliefs are, how they come to shape how they view their diagnosis and what lies ahead. So there are lots of ways to start that conversation. I think the first thing is it depends on what your relationship is like with your GP, who is really at the focus of coordinating all that care. So I'd really encourage patients and family members to get in contact with their GP early on, to start having some of these conversations. It may be that they don't actually know what's involved in them, but GPs are very much skilled and qualified in having these conversations and can help support patients and their families during a very difficult time. So, starting that conversation. And then there are ways to also formally document any conversations that are had through Coordinate My Care, or in London we have the Urgent Care Plan. This is an online service and actually online portal, and actually patients and their carers and relatives can also start filling in some of those sections as well, to get their needs and priorities and preferences documented. So there are lots of different ways, but the main thing is I'd encourage people to start thinking and having those conversations early on with healthcare professionals.
I wonder, it's such a, when you go through this, it's something that you've never been through before, is it? It's something that we only do once in our lives, come to the end of our lives. And often for families, it's the first time they've experienced it. And I think what I see in my work is that can feel really overwhelming, because there's just so much. And I wondered if I could ask you, Catherine, sort of, where do you start, do you think, with trying to think about this kind of stuff?
Which Catherine?
Oh, sorry. You, Catherine Windsor.
I think, yeah, I would agree with everything that Hina said. It's very much led by the patient. Both my mum and my dad died last summer, only a few weeks apart, and they were both very different in the way that they approached it. Mum was completely organised. She'd been through the thinking around, getting in touch with her local hospice, establishing links with them way before end of life was what we were talking about. She planned, she got wheels in motion. Dad hadn't had any of those conversations, and it very much happened out of the blue with Dad, and left us as a family we'd had the experience of Mum, so we knew a little bit more about what to expect. But I think the takeaway I would have from all of that is as a family member, when the person you love wants to have those conversations, you have to summon all the energy that you have to enable them to have those conversations. That's your job in it.
It's really tricky, isn't it? Because sometimes you're ready at different times. Yeah. And I wonder if we could pull in Howard and Sarah here, thinking about, for example, like your mum, Catherine, when you wanted to plan things in advance. How do you go about planning your funeral, Howard, Sarah?
You've got to have what we call in our family
Go
the
first,
talk.
Howard?
Sorry? Do you want to go, Sarah?
I think she was saying, do you want to go?
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, well, as I was saying, in our family, it's referred to as the talk, both for mum and dad. And recently, my son had the talk with myself and my wife. So it's all about planning, really, and having the right mindset to talk about it in a way that your family understands and that they can actually become involved with. And one of the good ways to do that is to sort of have a life funeral event where you can have a big party or celebration visually, in person or virtually. And the person that is terminally ill can then set the stall out, because how many times do we hear at funerals where people say, oh, I wish we were here now and they could have seen this and I loved this. So one of the things you can do is make it a bit fun, make it a bit of a party, invite friends and family and say, this is my own funeral celebration. It's not for everyone, but that's one way you can do it. The other is just finding out, get yourself a checklist. There's plenty of information out there on the web, and just go through it step by step. There's things you have to do to conform to law, and then there's other things you have to decide amongst yourself as a family. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? What do you want to do with the remains after you've been cremated? All kinds of things like that. So just start talking is my advice.
Sarah, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just two short things. So I would definitely echo what Howard said in terms of there being some really good checklists available. I'm sure you also have them in both of the organisations that are leading today. And they, well, I guess people tell me they're quite helpful because you can almost, you've got your list then, and you can pick the bits that feel maybe like the easiest place to start. And the other thing I would say is there may be some people that you're already connected to professionally that you feel just that little bit more comfortable with, and you have that little bit more of a relaxed rapport with, and maybe just that moment happens where you feel comfortable. And so I suppose the only other thing I would add is maybe just to launch into the conversation with the person in front of you at the time that works, and trust that by far and away the majority of professionals will then hold that space and help you and signpost you. And so yeah, just blurt it out to whoever's whoever's in the room when you're ready to blurt it out, and I'm sure that they'll help.
And Sarah,
can I just add on that? I would say if you're in the position of thinking about your own funeral and there are things you want, please say, because you have so much when someone dies, you have so much as a family member to organise, that actually sleepless nights about whether or not mum would have liked that poem is not what you need. No. So if there are bits of music, bits of music, readings, anything that you think you would like, you are really helping the people who will be organising your funeral by putting that stuff out there somewhere.
Yeah, I can read, sorry.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. When my dad died, there was nothing, and it took ages. It was really difficult, and I was only in my 20s and hadn't been through it before, and it would have been lovely to just know, or to have had some conversations, but it can make such a powerful, and then you think that you're honouring their memories as well. And I also didn't know how lovely, sorry Sarah, but how lovely funeral directors were. They were the most lovely people. I'm still, 20 years later, so grateful to them. They were just the most lovely. I saw them as really dark and just maybe a bit weird and just scary, really scary. But I thought, this was how. And then someone recommended someone lovely, and they were just wonderful, wonderful people that helped me. They took so much of a burden off my shoulders that I didn't know about. And yeah, it's so again, reaching out to them, they're not scary. And yeah, you're obviously quite lovely, Sarah, and I know that.
Thank you. Well, I was just sorry.
I was just going to say, the thing is as well, funeral directors are a good source of information, as are your local cemetery and crematorium. I mean, it's going to be peaks and troughs with the kind of service you get from them, but it's always a good starting point just to go and, I would say, shop around, because the thing that I'm against is funeral poverty, and people tend, especially people on lower income, to want to spend lavish amounts on a funeral because they think it's the right and proper thing to do, when, as Catherine was saying before, it's about making it meaningful, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to be able to do that. So talk to your family, talk to your friends, and talk to your carers.
And Jen, I think you were going to, Catherine W, I think you were going
No,
to...
I was just going to say exactly what Howard said, that in terms of just asking questions, I would back up everything Catherine said about funeral directors. I think I had a bit of a crush on mine by the time I'd finished, because we hung out quite a lot in the space of 7 weeks last summer, and just, yeah, so supportive, so helpful, and just such a source of information for us.
And one of the questions that came in was about, somebody was saying they didn't particularly like the idea of a traditional funeral, but didn't want to upset their family. Presumably, as funeral directors, you're happy to speak to people in advance about the kinds of options and things that they could choose and would be available.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just following on a little bit from what people were saying before, so we've done some research actually with the University of York, and one of the most important things that people consistently said is that knowing somebody's wishes was really, really helpful. And actually that could be one wish. So exactly as Catherine said, it could be a song choice, it could be a particular flower, or it might be really, really elaborate. And actually the amount of wish, if you see what I mean, didn't really matter. So this can be quite a small thing, but the act of fulfilling those wishes, that feeling of gifting and how consoling that was, I mean, it was by far the most consistent thing that people said. Because if somebody's told you one thing, they're kind of also inferring that the other bits they're okay to leave to you. So because they've told you the bits that matter, so you don't have to have those sleepless nights that the other Catherine mentioned, because they've told you the bit that matters, and you can fulfill that and gift that. And then yes, so we certainly, and I suspect the majority of funeral directors are really, really happy to meet with people to talk through what they're thinking and how to put that together into, again, just some sort of very either informal or more formal document. And we do that a lot with people. And we also, so people might contact us because they want to express their wishes but don't want to upset their family. Or we also have people contact us and say, I'd really like to ask my relative what they want. How do I do that? And you can't help but think actually everyone's sitting in the same room having exactly the same thoughts, but don't quite know how to do it. And actually, both of those conversations often end up being really quite positive, because you're putting something together that's meaningful and reflects somebody. And so it's actually, I would definitely, for everyone listening, it is a surprisingly positive experience, and there's quite a lot of laughing, and at the end most people feel an overwhelming sense of relief, that they think, gosh, that's a really great that's a big box tick, that feels good, I'm pleased with what I've done, and now I can maybe go on to think about some of the other things.
Could you just
sorry, Catherine,
specifically, like what are some of the range of so you've got your traditional, you can have your coffin, and it can be the wooden thing that you all think of, and I've seen cardboard ones, but that is about the extent of my knowledge of
okay
What is the fabulous range that we could actually...
Oh gosh, okay, so there's all sorts of coffins, I guess, to go there. So cardboard, wool, pictures, wicker, traditional wood. You don't even have to have a coffin, you can have a shroud as a coffin alternative. You can have services in all sorts of locations, so crematoria and church. You can also have them in village halls, lots of conference places, hotels, outside in your garden, all sorts of places. You can have services led by ministers, by professional celebrants, by your friends and family. You can have no service at all. You can go to the crematorium. You can have a burial in a local authority burial cemetery. You can have it in a natural burial ground. You can have woodland burials. You can be buried in your garden as long as you own it. The range is massive. Some people choose to not have a gathering with the person who's died present at all. So maybe arrange for something like a direct cremation, which is where after somebody's died, the cremation is arranged, but there's no service attached to it. And then maybe have a gathering at another point and some sort of, something spoken or something done. So, there are, as Howard said, funeral care is unregulated. There are very, very few rules. And so I would always suggest that you start from, what do we know about the person? What do I know that I want? What matters? What do I like? What do I not like? And then invariably you can put that together into something that that respects somebody's beliefs, their values, as Hina said, their spirituality, everything that, guides the decisions that people make in life can guide the decisions that are made for their funeral and afterwards.
Yeah, I think, getting back to Sarah H's point about traditional funeral, in the 20th century, we kind of lost touch with how death and dying used to be discussed amongst families and villages and towns all the time. When I worked in Scotland, they used to put death notices on telegraph poles so the whole community could go and things like that, And I think bringing mum, dad or whoever home for a few days as well, if you want to, or on the day of the funeral with the coffin open if you feel that's appropriate, all that kind of thing can be done. But you don't have to have the traditional Victorian style all black hearse, limousine, processional type funeral. You can have what you want, and a good funeral director and a good local authority will be able to help you mold that into something that is the art of possible. So you're only limited really by two things, budget and then imagination. And I think we have banana leaf coffins as well, Sarah, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
So humor is the thing, for me. You've got to keep your feet grounded. It's very sad. It always is. It's a lot of fear. But, we brought Dad home, opened his coffin, put him in his RAF blazer. We looked really nice. And then we were all hungry, so we popped out to Subways and brought a sandwich back and ate it round him. So, there's no right or wrong in grief or bereavement. It's down to what is meaningful to you as an individual and a family. And if you can respect the deceased person's wishes, then that helps you heal after.
I wonder if I could ask a practical question. It's one of the questions that's come in, but I heard about it also recently. I was out driving to go and see somebody at home, and Jeremy Vine was talking about the challenge of, after somebody's death, trying to sort out all the online accounts. The particular slot on Jeremy Vine was about phone companies and trying to sort out people's mobile phones. Sarah J and Howard, do you have any advice about how to manage that sort of social media, banking, all that sort of stuff after somebody's gone?
Yeah, definitely. So what I would say, there are a couple of organisations now that support with this. So end of life admin. So one of them is called Settled, and the other one is called Life Ledger, and there will probably be more. We should make that disclaimer, shouldn't we? They're just the ones I know of. So and what they do is they allow somebody to put all of that information in one place, and then what they do is they do the actual calling. So they would contact the telephone company, Virgin Media, whoever. So what would be really helpful if you're planning for your own end of life is just put down somewhere helpfully all of the accounts, all of your subscriptions, all of the institutions that you have some sort of commitment to, put them in one place So then when your relative or executor, who everybody is taking responsibility, all they need to do, they can either then do it themselves, or they can transfer all of that information onto one of these support platforms. And that would make life an awful lot easier from a social media perspective, because actually this is, a friend of mine, her husband died recently, and he was all about cyber security, and they can't get into his computer, and they can't find his photographs. They just cannot get in. They've had the head honcho of Apple, you know. So just, yeah, either share your passwords, put stuff somewhere that's publicly available, or for most social media accounts, you can put in your legacy wishes, which would often name somebody else to then be able to take over the account.
Adding to that as well, for this, what we now refer to as a digital legacy, and especially when it comes to JPEGs, we've got thousands and thousands of photos floating about in a cloud somewhere, and Google won't let you have them, even though it's your relatives. So what I would also suggest is getting a good password manager that has a master code. So if you lose it, you lose everything. But on some of them, I use Nord myself, you can actually set up someone who you think is not going to predecease you. So my son has access. So when it's my time, or I go on the wheels of bus, my wife who's not digitally inclined, my son will just be able to go in and get all the passwords and everything and do what they need. And also, when you register with death, there's a system called Tell Us One. So you'll be given a reference number by the registrar, and you can either go online or you can ring them up. You've got to activate it yourself. And you've got 28 days, I think, to do it after the registration. And that will go through a whole host of government departments and things like that as well. So, yeah, and it comes back to what we all said at the start, proper planning, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, wholeheartedly echo all of that. We used Tell Us Once, and actually it was a very efficient service. I'm going to add, and there is a funny story, which I know that my mum would be perfectly happy for me to share. Mobile phones, how many of us have facial recognition or fingerprint recognition on our phones? And so as we were waiting for our undertakers to come and collect mum died at home, kind of the conversation happened around, right, we need to start making calls. People don't often have, not everyone has an address book now that's up to date. It's all in your phone. And there was a moment at about 5:30 in the morning when my brother and I looked at each other and realized that all the people that we needed to call were in my mum's phone, and one of us was going to have to hold that phone over mum in order to try and unlock it, and it didn't work. So we straight away ran into that problem of, you know, gosh, if only we'd thought about that and maybe got mum to take facial recognition and fingerprint off of her phone and put a password or a code on, then we would have had that access. So really silly things like that, but in that moment would have made a real difference if we'd not had to battle, you know, with a phone and my mum.
I'd also add a friend of mine who's got a sort of serious illness. He went into hospital completely unexpectedly, so not at the end of life, but actually there was a period where he was in ICU, and because he hadn't been thinking, well, I'm nowhere near yet, I know I will get to that, but it was impossible. He's an accountant, so everything is super detailed, but we didn't have any of his codes, and it was really difficult for his parents because the thought was you only do that when you know that you're nearing the end of life, but sort of the sooner the better for the just in case moments. And he's now back at home and fine, luckily, but for a period of time. But I'm aware we have Hina, and obviously you're chair of the Muslim Doctors Association and a huge fountain of knowledge. We haven't heard from a sort of cultural perspective, what are the things that matter most from a Muslim faith, and what are the differences and things that we could potentially plan for better? And I just wondered, from your perspective, it would be really interesting to hear.
Thanks, Catherine. It's been really interesting hearing the other panelists as well. And actually there's, you know, it's not very dissimilar. It's all about making sure that everything that happens is meaningful and is in accordance with the preference of the patient, and having those conversations early. But one of the things I would say from a Muslim perspective, but also from a Jewish perspective, is early burials is a huge thing. In the Muslim community and Jewish community, if somebody dies, it's really important for them to be buried early on. And in some way, if somebody has a terminal illness or has been given an end of life diagnosis, it makes that a little bit easier, because you can then plan and do things to make sure that there aren't any delays. So some of the things that I would encourage patients and their relatives and carers to do, for example, to prevent any delay that might occur in that kind of burial and funeral process, would be to make sure, for example, if they're discharged from hospital, that they make contact with their GP in their practice to have an early review. And similarly, if they are if they are on the palliative care list of that practice, they should be having a review regularly, at least once every 28 days. And so if that hasn't happened, then it would be important for them to contact the practice and make sure that they do have get that review, because if that doesn't happen, then there may be delays through, the coroner and getting all the paperwork sorted. So just making sure that you're regularly having those conversations and engagement with the practice or the hospice team and whoever else is involved in your care, so maybe district nurses as well, palliative care nurses that come in. So just making sure that you're regularly engaged with them can be really helpful to prevent, any delays to something that is so important in both of those faiths in particular.
And I hugely echo that. So we are regularly contacted by people who are preparing themselves to a need to arrange a Muslim or a Jewish funeral. And by far the most important thing really that we can share with them is, we're ready to mobilise, the registrars are ready to mobilise, but you have to make sure that that individual who is dying has had contact with a medical professional who would be able to issue the death certificate within the right time scale, because in the absence of that, the rest of us there's nothing we can do. That's the kind of critical step, really. And a lot of people who contact us don't know that. So that, I feel like if there's one thing that we could share with the community that would be really helpful, it would be that. Just pop in and see your GP every now and then, because it really makes a massive difference.
Yeah, can I just say for our audience, the reason for 28 days is that's a statutory requirement that the attending doctor, and that can be virtual but not by telephone or other audio means, has got to have seen the patient within the last 28 days. And the reason for that is because then they can issue what's called a medical certificate of cause of death, which you need to be able to register the death. So with the Jewish and Muslim faith, it would delay getting their burial within 24 or 48 hours if that MCCD has not been issued, because then it has to be reported to the coroner, and there's a whole sort of complex set of that. So I strongly advise any person in the unfortunate position to be terminally ill themselves or caring for someone who's terminally ill to make sure that you see your doctor within 28 days, and don't rely on your doctor to do that, because mistakes happen. Take ownership of that, because then they'll be able to issue the certificate which allow you to register the death, which is a legal requirement and has to be done within 5 days from the date of death or being found dead. And that then they can issue you what's called the green certificate for a burial or a cremation. Now, with regards to what we refer to now as rapid burials for the Jewish and Muslim faith, there is statutory agreement to allow for registration to take place after burial, but that cannot be done unless you have that medical certificate for cause of death surrendered to the registrar. So I just want to make that point for our target audience, because it's super important. No one else can do anything else until that certificate is delivered to the registrar. The registrar's issued their disposal certificate. Thank you.
We've actually got a question come through. Catherine, can you see them?
Yes, I was just going to
Brilliant.
say I'm so excited when we actually get the Q&A that starts going wild. And I'm aware we've got until, we're going to extend it till 11:35 this session. So I wonder, Hina, could you maybe answer, because I think this is posed to you, the one maybe actually online, and then I'm going to ask Sarah Holmes, our sort of palliative care, specialist palliative care expert, on, we've got a pertinent question, because I think this really does happen. I know it's specific for you, but family members often we don't always share. Some family members don't always share what's going on. So I'll just read that out for Sarah, and in case other people aren't seeing it. So my dad is my mum's carer, as he doesn't work and I work full time. She's on palliative care for a few months now. Chemo for stage 4 ended last year as it wasn't helping. She's barely been eating anything these 2 weeks and is sometimes confused, but I have no idea of what mum's prognosis is, and he's domineering over her care and critical of mum's palliative nurse. He tells me nothing about what their GP and palliative nurse says, only his criticisms of them. How can I find out mum's prognosis?
Gosh, that's a tough one, isn't it? And I'm sorry, I don't know your name. It just says C, so I'm sorry, C, to hear that about your mum, and also that you're going through such a difficult time yourself as well. It's not an uncommon situation. We do see this where family members have different amounts of information, or share different amounts of information, or as Catherine, and it sounds like with your family, some family hold on to information and keep it sort of locked tight. In terms of health professionals, it's really your mum who determines who health professionals can talk to. So I think one of the first steps might be for you to have a word with your mum and ask your mum if she would be happy for those health professionals to talk to you. And if she is, then you're perfectly okay to approach those health professionals yourself. The health professionals, the GP and the palliative care nurse, may want to check in with your mum and say, is it okay if I talk to your daughter? But then they can actually have a direct conversation with you. And quite often, it may be that your mum wants one level of information and you want a different level, but your mum might well be happy for you to have that different level. So I would approach your mum, and I would also approach the palliative care professional and the GP as well. It's part of our jobs, Catherine and Hina and I, to make sure that we look after family members of people who are dying just as much as the person who's dying, because we don't come alone, we come with all these people attached, and it's really important for your own health and well-being that you're looked after too. So I think the palliative care nurse and the GP would actually probably be very keen to share information with you if your mum is happy with that. So I would approach one and both and see if you can get them to talk to you.
I think just on a practical level as well, that as a GP, if you know that you're part of the family, and even if she's not well enough necessarily to give consent, if you're acting in sort of best interest for all family members, and if your dad isn't saying, I don't want you to know anything, there are probably ways of just being able to, and not necessarily saying, I want to know the exact medical details, but can you give me an idea? I just want to plan. Is mum's, really sick enough now that she's near to dying in the next few days or weeks, or is there a longer period of time, just to give an inkling and to support you, to help you plan whether you take any time off work or whatever it is that's important for you, and whether that's palliative care nurse. I'm sure either GP or palliative care nurse would welcome if you just called them to say, could you have a chat, because there's often a middle ground of what can be sort of how they can support you. So I would just definitely reach out and not be worried about that if you haven't already. Hina, are you?
Yeah, I can take the next question. So I'll just read it out as well. So there are such variations in how services and local authorities are aware of faith needs across the UK, and there is evidence of unmet need and low engagement in end-of-life services. Is there a cultural stigma in accessing services? So that's a really good question, and I would say yes, but there are lots of other factors as well. So we do know that there's unmet need across various communities, culturally diverse communities, and cultural stigma may be part of that. So stigma around having a long-term illness and not wanting to tell other people about it can sometimes mean that they're not getting the support that they need from healthcare professionals, but also in the wider community. And also the stigma around dying and conversations around dying. So it can be sometimes difficult to really understand what a patient wants, because the relatives around them might not want to approach that topic, and obviously that means that that information is not communicated with healthcare professionals involved in their care. But also there are I would say, the understanding around palliative care in certain communities is still not that great. And I think there's work to be done in trying to raise awareness of what palliative care is and how it can support patients and families in that really critical time, of a person and their loved ones around them. So I think that is also a contributing factor to low engagement with services and contributing to unmet needs. And also services themselves, I think, could do a lot more to be more culturally responsive and sensitive. And I think today is a great example of what can be done when we're having these conversations and looking at how diverse communities can be supported and what some of the issues are within those communities. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done like this in order to really understand, how different communities and different patients may have different needs that would need to be accommodated. And just to add to that, actually, we are producing some guidance for the Muslim community around end-of-life care, which will be published sometime next month. So and that's really in response to so many questions that we've had, in particular over the last 2 years during the pandemic, around end-of-life care and palliative care. So we recognise that there is a need to have that conversation, that information disseminated across the community.
Thank you, really fantastic. Sarah, I wanted.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see, and sometimes there are challenges, is thinking about resuscitation. And one of the concerns sometimes that we hear about is people being asked to sign DNA CPR forms and what resuscitation means. Can you talk a bit about resuscitation, Hina, and what resuscitation is and isn't, and what a DNA CPR form is?
Thanks, Sarah. And actually, that reminds, as you were speaking, that reminded me, I should have brought that up, because I know from the conversations that I have with patients and families around resuscitation, again, it's one of those things that isn't very well understood. And I think for various reasons. So one of them I've really mentioned is around this kind of not wanting to have conversations around death and dying because it feels really uncomfortable, and patients and relatives may not be ready to have those conversations. And secondly, it's kind of where we get our information around CPR. So a lot of the times it's from the media, where it's really, we see these really heroic efforts and kind of it can be over glamorized. But actually, when you have a conversation with a patient and their family around resuscitation and what it can mean, and obviously it means different things to different people. So in terms of the outcome, so initially some people say, well, we just want everything done. Of course we want our relative to be resuscitated, and in particular, if you come from a faith background, they might say, some comments that I hear are, well, life belongs to God, and so we can't do, we have to do everything to maintain the sanctity of life. And actually that isn't really what lots of faith teach. It teaches, certainly from the Muslim perspective, it's about dignity, it's about not prolonging suffering, which if you do DNA CPR, for some patients it may mean that if they are walking and talking and despite having an end-of-life care diagnosis, if they do get resuscitated, and if it is successful, and the likelihood of success is quite small outside of hospital, they may end up in a state where they're not able to do the things that they were able to do before. And when I have that conversation with patients, they say, well, actually, no, we don't want to, we don't want to be dependent, or we don't want to have a poorer quality of life than we have right now. And when they understand what the implications are of resuscitation, then actually they're able to have a much more balanced understanding and come to a decision that's right for them, and also that healthcare professionals would also support. We're not there to make decisions for patients and their relatives, we're there to support them, and that's the important thing. We would never, as GPs, we would never impose a decision upon a patient and say that you're not going to be resuscitated, or we are going to resuscitate you. That, from a general practice perspective, for us, relationships with patients and families are really important, and we would do whatever we can to support the patient's needs and the family's preferences as well in those situations.
I wonder if I could just add as well that I think sort of resuscitation is a very specific treatment or attempt at a treatment. So it's really just at trying to, if you have already died, trying to restart your heart and bring you back to life. And I think, as you said, Hina, it on the telly, it looks like it works every single time you do it. It's always brilliantly successful and everybody comes back to as they were. I think in practice, what we know from research is that actually the chances of it being successful when you have a very advanced illness or cancer and are at the point of dying, the chances of it being successful are very slim. It actually has a very low success rate anyway. So if I were to collapse now, the chances of me actually successfully being resuscitated would probably be only 1 in 10. And that's hard, but I think what we often talk about with patients and families when they're thinking about this is whether we think that it's a treatment that might work. If we think it might work, then that's something that would absolutely be your decision about whether you want to opt for us to try that treatment in the first place. But we will, as health professionals, give guidance about, actually, we think that the chances of this working are really very slim. This is difficult stuff to talk about, but actually, would you prefer to die comfortably and in dignity and with your family around you, rather than with us as staff trying to jump up and down on your chest, possibly breaking some ribs in the process? That it's quite a brutal process, and I'm sorry to be talking about it so bluntly, but I think it's important to be open and honest about it.
And I would echo all of that, and I would just add that if you do go down the route of having that DNR paperwork signed, just make sure that everybody knows where it is, because you need to be able to give it to a paramedic or a member of the ambulance crew for them to know that it's the patient wishes. So when my dad died, I wasn't there, my brother was. I was trying, amidst all the chaos on the phone, to say to him, there's a DNR, you need to locate it. And also, I think just practically, just make sure that people understand that on arrival, the paramedic, yes, had to ascertain that there was the paperwork, but they then do have to hook the dying dead person up to machines for a period of time, just so that they can then declare that death has happened. And so when I arrived, it looked like there was some sort of medical intervention happening, and actually it was just the paramedic letting the electrical pulses, on the machine happen. And that's, again, apologies for the graphicness of the description, but that came as a real surprise to me. I didn't know that that's what I would find. I just assumed, oh, there's a do not resuscitate in place, there's not going to be any medical machines and paraphernalia, and when I arrived there was. So yeah, it's useful to know what to expect and that people know where the paperwork is.
Thank you. We've got 2 questions I can see. One that we've come in from the chat, and I wondered, Sarah, would you be able to maybe type in that so we get to both of them? And then another really important part that came up several times is, how do we decide where we want to die and what are our options? And if we do want a home death, what are some of the things that we need to consider and have conversations about to enable that? And I just wondered, oh, and there was something important. Also, could we mention, Sarah J has said that people can also choose for someone to stay at home after they've died. So I just wondered if we could eke out, how do we choose and decide? And if we want to die at home, what should we do? Hina, do you want to kick off?
Sure. So I actually support patients to die at home. And again, it's kind of a recurrent theme that's coming through this morning is having conversations with patients and exploring what's important to them and what their preferences are. And the earlier that's done, you know, the more planning that can be put in place. So briefly, there are 3 options that I discuss with patients and their families, and it's, you know, dying at home, dying in a hospice, or in hospital. And the majority of people will say no to a hospital for obvious reasons. It's very confusing, it's chaotic, you know, it's not the kind of environment that somebody would want to spend the last days of their life in. And so that leaves 2 main options, which is home and hospice. So normally we would then, you know, refer them to the palliative care team. So the palliative care nurses would come and visit the patient and family at home, talk to them about, you know, what hospice care involves. Because a lot of the times I find people don't know what a hospice is. They think it means that it's just kind of, you know, the final admission for them, and they just have all these associations with them. But actually, it may be that they can also have a temporary admission when they're not well. So the palliative care team will come and talk to them about hospice. They may even have the chance to visit it and see for themselves what what it looks like, or who's there, who looks after them. And then there's the option of dying at home. And some people might be really worried that actually if they die at home, they might be alone, they might not have the support they need. And that's not true. There will be lots of professionals involved in the patient's care. So from the GP to the district nurses, palliative care nurses, there may be, other professionals, OTs and physios who might be coming in as well to support. And especially during the last few days, the nurses will be coming in several times a day and be in close contact with the GP to make sure that everything is, that we're responding to the patient's needs. So, to have that conversation, there are a lot of things that it depends on, really. When I sit down and have this conversation, just kind of understanding, well, what do they know about the options, and then what's important to them. Some patients have a very strong preference that we just want to be at home. It's where we've lived all our lives, and that's what they want, and that's fine. But sometimes you just need to explore the options with them a little bit more and get them to see what they are.
Thank you. I was only putting my finger up because I know we've got about 1 minute, and I also just wanted to thank you. The other part is, if you, a family member, so often I experience someone wants to die at home and their loved one is going, but I can't cope. I just don't know how I'm going to possibly manage that. And should they go to a hospice or not? Be open about it. Approach maybe the hospice to have a discussion to see what the options are, and just keep once you've made a decision, sometimes things have to change, so just keep the dialogue open. Reach out to the professionals early to help support those conversations in the family if you find it difficult to maybe decide. 30 seconds, Sarah. What are the options for people after they've died at home? Things like you can wash the body, have ceremonies. What are the lovely things that you can do that some people will like, some people won't? Over to you, and then over to Catherine to close. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll be very brief. So I think the main thing I want to say is that all of that sense of control and having this beautiful network around you to support what you want, that doesn't have to end after somebody's died. So somebody can stay at home for a few hours so that other people can maybe come and visit and see somebody at home. That can be days, that could be up until the funeral. So there are lots and lots of options and choice. And I think that's probably the biggest point. So don't let anybody take control away from you just because somebody has died. You might need to kind of step up a little bit and be brave, but there is no reason why you should lose control. If you know what you need, or you need time to think about that, then that is your right, and people will want to help you. You might just sometimes need to remind them.
What a brilliant place to end. You are in control, and what you want matters. And yes, make sure that the people around you that love you know what you want and are in a position to be able to advocate for that. I think that's a great place for us to end our first session. I want to say enormous thanks to all of our panelists, to Sarah, to Howard, to Hina, to Catherine, and to Sarah for expertly guiding us through what could have been a tough session for me in particular, but we've made it. So, and I really hope that the people watching have picked some stuff up and have, you know, learnt a little bit and perhaps gone away with a clearer sense of next steps for them. So we will be taking a short break now, and then we're going to restart with our next session, which is around controlling symptoms, and we're going to just shift the agenda slightly because we've overrun. So we're going to start that session at 11:45, so 11:45. So time for a wee slice of cake, cup of tea, and see you in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Right, practical arrangements.
Hello.
Hello.
And welcome to our Preparing for the End of Life event. I'm Catherine, for those of you who are joining us new, and I'm Director of Services at Bowel Cancer UK.
And I'm Genevieve, and I'm the Chief Executive of Bowel Cancer UK. So thank you to everyone who's joined us for this session. We are recording this session, so if you've missed any of it, you'll be able to watch it back on our YouTube channel in due course. We'll be getting that up, along with all our sessions are on there, so there might be other bits of content that you're also interested in. So we've got a lot to get through.
Yes, and lots of things just to highlight to you. As Jen says, we are recording, but we also want to hear from you during these sessions. So at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little speech bubble, and that's the that's the chat function, isn't it? Yes, the chat function, and that's where we want you just to post comments, thoughts, things that you've found particularly interesting for everyone to see, and just to say that those comments don't appear on the recorded version, so your anonymity is not an issue there. There's also a Q&A box at the bottom as well, which is where we'd like you to put any questions that you have for our panelists. So please try and remember to put questions in the Q&A box, because the panelists can see them there. If you pop them in the chat, we may not see them and they won't get answered. We'll do everything we can to answer as many of the questions as possible. We managed it in the last session, we answered them all, but if there are any that we don't have time for, then we will ask our experts to write an answer afterwards, and we'll send that out. So on to our next session, which is around controlling symptoms. So I'm delighted to reintroduce you to Sarah Holmes, who, if you were with us before the break, you will have already met Sarah. And our other speaker is our very own Claire Coughlin. And Claire is our clinical lead here at Bowel Cancer UK, but she has another life. And Claire, I'm going to let you tell everybody about your professional life, if that's all right.
Hello, hopefully you can see and hear me. Yes, so thank you, Catherine. I'm Claire Coughlin. I'm clinical lead at Bowel Cancer UK, but I'm also a nurse consultant in colorectal cancer and have been for many years at Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here at this event this morning. Thank you.
Brilliant. So the format of this session is that we've got some questions, again, that our community have asked us to pose, and Claire and Sarah are going to give us the benefit of their experience and insight in answering them. And then at the end of the session, there'll be an open Q&A for any questions that have come through from our audience.
That's right. So if is there anything that you want to know, pop it in that Q&A box that Catherine mentioned earlier, and we'll get through as many of those as we can, and hopefully we'll get through them all.
Absolutely. So to kick us off, our first question, my mum doesn't seem to be in any pain. How will I know when she is in pain? And if she does start to complain of being in pain, what should I do and who should I contact? Great question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, that's a brilliant question. And can I just say as well, with the Q&A, no question is a stupid question. So ask any question that you like. It's always hard, isn't it? Because you then go away and think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, but I don't want anybody to go away thinking that. So
well, and if you're thinking it, there's probably lots of other people thinking it too.
Exactly. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be any pain. That's great. I think lots of people assume that when you have cancer and you're dying of cancer, you're going to get pain. That's not necessarily the case. So not everybody does have pain. So that's the first thing to say. How do you know somebody's in pain? Obviously asking is a really good thing to do, and it's important to make sure that people feel comfortable to talk about pain and to say, we do want you to we can do things to manage your pain, so please don't hold back in telling us about your pain. I see quite a lot that people think, oh, I'll put up with this because I need to put up with it, but actually we can manage it. Sometimes people aren't well enough to say whether they're in pain, And you can usually tell when somebody's in pain from simple cues. So looking at their face, are they frowning? Or sometimes people get restless or fidgety, or do they seem tense? If you're holding their hand, are they gripping onto it? And so simple things take from how they are in themselves, and you'll know your loved ones, you know what's normal for them. I think if somebody does start to get pain, as I said, it's really, really important to get in touch with somebody about that. It's never a bother for us. We would rather know and sort it out quickly than have somebody putting up with it. And there are all sorts of people that will be there to help. First port of call, district nurse or your own GP, and they're really skilled at managing pain. Sometimes the pain might be a little bit more tricky, and then they might want to get somebody like myself involved, or a community palliative care nurse or a Macmillan nurse. But your GP or district nurse will be able to guide you about that.
That's really helpful. There's another question here about pain, actually, and it's like, should I hold off taking painkillers? Is there a sense where you can take painkillers too soon?
Yeah, lots of people worry about that, and the blunt answer is no. So there's never a too soon to take it. I think the thing with going through any illness is it's very much your own personal experience. So only you will know when you know, how the pain feels and whether it's the kind of pain that you want to take a painkiller for. But I would encourage people to take painkillers if you feel you need them. One of the things that I hear is people get worried about morphine. So it's a painkiller that is a strong painkiller, but people worry that when they've got cancer, that the pain is going to get really bad, and if they start morphine too soon, the morphine might not work near the end, and it might be difficult to control their pain. That's a myth and just isn't true. So we can start morphine in really tiny doses if you did need it, and we can increase it if it's needed, but a lot of people don't need it increasing. You don't get addicted to morphine when it's prescribed properly by a professional, and when you have a life-limiting illness like cancer. So you're not going to get addicted to it, and you're not going to get used to it. So it's worth, if you're suffering with pain, taking that and starting that if your doctor recommends it.
Great, there you go.
Yeah.
No. That was a very firm, very decisive no. We like that. We like clear answers.
Clarity, yeah.
Absolutely. So our next question is around bowel control. So it's sometimes I struggle with opening my bowels. What can I do to help this?
Okay. I think so. So my world is all things bowel. So I think I shall. I'll take this question if that's okay. So, constipation, I suppose, is a very common symptom for lots of disease processes, for a multitude of reasons. So when you're feeling unwell, you move less, you drink less, and you often may find that you lose your appetite as well. And that's true in lots of situations, not just in cancer. When it comes to bowel cancer, it may be that you still have disease in your bowel, or that you've had treatment on your bowel. So it can be a little bit more complicated. I would always say start with the simplest things first. So if you're struggling to open your bowels, can you drink a bit more, and can you move a little bit more? It might be that you're just not well enough to do those things at the moment. And there are some fantastic, what we call laxatives broadly, that your district nurse, your GP, your palliative care nurse, or your colorectal nurse specialist will be able to advise you about. The important thing to say is that laxatives is a very broad term, and laxatives do very different things. So whoever you speak to, your GP or one of your nursing team, will want to know a bit more about your constipation, because laxatives actually are amazing. Some of them bulk your stool, some of them draw water into your bowel, some of them make your poo a bit easier to move through your bowel. So it's important that we know what sort of constipation you're having, and we can then advise you about the right sort of laxative. The other thing to say, sorry, Catherine, is that another really simple tip is how you sit on the loo. So sitting back, slumped on our toilets is a terrible idea. Our toilets are terrible. They're very poorly designed. And if I could do one thing, it would be go back and redesign toilets in this part of the world. Because
She's
actually,
very passionate about this, aren't you?
I'm very passionate about this, because we
You're
make it really hard for ourselves to poo. So if just sitting forward and raising your feet up so you're in a squatting position might be enough to actually just help you to pass the stool more easily.
Yeah.
If you have a stoma, you can still get constipated. So it's important to realise that. You can take stool softeners, but talk to your stoma nurse, because they're brilliant at this. You can also, if needs be, have an enema down your stoma. And that can help relieve constipation. The same way as you can have an enema through your bottom, and that can help as well. And your district nurses will be really used to dealing with this, as will your stoma nurses and your palliative care team. The final thing I'd add is sometimes you get something called overflow. So you think, I'm not constipated. I'm not. I've got this diarrhea. And that's because there's a great big hard lump of poo that's stopping the stool coming out properly, and you get this overflow. So if you're feeling uncomfortable with it, it's important that you explain that you're uncomfortable and what's happening. So do please tell your healthcare professionals exactly. Don't be embarrassed. People like me love talking about it and love nothing more than helping with it.
Claire, some cracking tips there. Really, really good tips. Now, you were saying really you need to be talking to your district nurses, your stoma nurses. How do people recognise when they need a bit of extra help? Is it always obvious?
I imagine if you have bowel cancer, you probably live with pain and discomfort in your bowel a lot of the time, and therefore, how do you know when
so they're really good questions. So if you're starting to feel nauseous and you're not opening your bowels, or your tummy's blowing up, what we call distended, then that's when we want you to be telling somebody. And actually, you might then ring your palliative care nurse and say, I feel sick, I feel distended. And what you want them to do is tell you how to sort that out immediately. But you might then need to have a proper assessment by your GP or even by your hospital team. Somebody needs to look to make sure that your bowel isn't blocked. So they'll ask you all sorts of questions like, are you passing wind? Are you able to? Or if you've got a stoma, is your bag blowing up? There's nothing coming out, but is your bag blowing up? So they'll want more information. But if you start to feel sick and your tummy's blowing up, we want to know about that quite quickly. Okay, does that answer that?
Brilliant, thanks, Claire.
So I've just got another question that's come in here, which is that my loved one doesn't seem to be eating very much. Is there something I should be giving them in particular? I don't know, Sarah, if you've got thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. We're brought up, aren't we? It's human nature to, if you're poorly, if you're not well, feed somebody up. It's what our mums did for us when we were poorly, when we were little, and it's what we do for our loved ones if they're not well. We want to nourish them. It's really common for appetite to deteriorate if you're living with a terminal illness. And what I see sometimes is that people get into sort of battles about food. Family members or loved ones really want to make sure that the person eats as much as they can. And the person then feels overwhelmed with, oh gosh, I'm trying to eat, and food gets to be tricky. So one of the things that happens when you have cancer is the cancer itself takes some of the calories and the energy that you need from food. and because you're sometimes doing less, you don't need those calories in the same way. I think it's really important that when you eat what you fancy. So having a little bit more often is sometimes better than having 3 great big meals. So I would sometimes suggest to people, serve food on a dessert plate rather than a dinner plate. That doesn't overface you quite as much, then it doesn't look quite as daunting. And if somebody fancies something, I really fancy sticky toffee pudding, great, have sticky toffee pudding, make that your main course. Don't worry about the meat and 2 veg, and enjoy that. And if you only eat 2 mouthfuls, that's great, you've enjoyed those 2 mouthfuls. Take pleasure from the food that you can eat rather than battling to eat stuff if you feel like you can't. The other thing is your GP or your district nurse may give you some nutritional supplements to try and boost, so that if you're not managing to eat quite as much and you're still having some treatment, they may give you that. But right towards the very end of life, it's very normal for appetite to drop off, and people often just have little mouthfuls of things, and that's okay.
This is something that's really close to my heart, actually, because I wish I'd known this, because in the last week of my mum's life, this is exactly what happened, and I didn't really understand quite what was happening. And what you said there, Sarah, about becoming a bit of a battle is absolutely, it's inbuilt in us, isn't it? So, come on, mum, eat. And actually, if I'd known what was going on, I would have backed right off, and would have meant that my last few conversations with my mum weren't always started with me nagging about you haven't eaten very much. So yeah, I think that's a really, really critical thing for us to have pulled out in this.
It's so common, but it comes from love, doesn't it?
Yes,
it comes from
absolutely.
You want to nurture that person forever, so you're so it's really common, but it's the best piece of advice about just don't let it become a battleground if you can. It's not easy.
That is,
yes.
Yeah, that's the important thing, isn't it? I'm going to move us on to another question here. It's a bit technical, and I think what often happens is you when you're going through this journey, a lot of things, a lot of terminology, and a lot of things may be suggested or talked about, and people often don't know what that is and what it means and and this question here is very much related to that. The question says, it's been suggested that it might be helpful for me to start on a syringe driver. What does this mean? And what is
a syringe
what
driver?
Does this mean? Exactly.
Right, well, I have a syringe driver and I can show you a syringe driver. So a syringe driver is just a different way of delivering a medicine. So, and what I should say, Jen, is that doctors and nurses are sometimes bad at talking in language that is complicated. We get used to lots of different complicated words. So I would encourage people, if your doctor or nurse or professional is saying stuff that you don't understand, just tell them, ask them to say it differently. Don't sit and feel, and come away from something you haven't understood. They won't mind. So a syringe driver is a way of giving medicine into your body when you can't absorb medicine by mouth. So quite often when you're feeling sick or being sick, it means that your bowel doesn't absorb stuff as well. Even if you're just feeling queasy, it can actually affect how your bowel absorbs medicines. So if you carry on taking them by mouth, that sometimes means that you're not really getting them in because they won't be absorbed properly. So the syringe driver is a tiny little box, well, not tiny, but a small box. As you can see, it's just about the length of my hand. It's a pump, and instead of you taking your tablets by mouth, it would be an injectable medicine that gets put in this syringe here. There's a long tube which is attached to a tiny little plastic needle that would just be inserted under the skin on your upper arm or your upper chest or on your back, and that would deliver the medicine into your body over 24 hours. So if, for example, you were taking regular painkillers and you were having a difficult time with being sick or feeling sick, your doctor or nurse might suggest, right, we'll put those painkillers into a pump and we'll put some anti-sickness medicine into the pump so that you don't have to worry about keeping on trying to take the tablets, and so that we know that you're getting the medicine you need. Does that make sense?
Complete
sense, and great to see one. So thank you for sort of having it there. I think one of the things we hear a lot is that there's a bit of a misconception, isn't there, that when it's time for the syringe driver to be mentioned, that's because you are in bed in the final hours of your life. For what sorts of reasons might you be given a syringe driver?
Yeah, so sometimes it's basically any time where you're not going to be able to get your medicines by mouth. So people do sometimes have them at the end of life, in the last hours and days of life, because they're no longer awake enough to take medicines.
Right.
But it doesn't just apply at those times. So quite often with people living with bowel cancer, you might have one at other points in your illness. So if you're perhaps struggling with an episode of bowel obstruction where your bowel is blocked, and we know that medicines aren't going to get absorbed properly by your bowel, your doctor might suggest that we start a syringe driver until that obstruction settles. So you may just be on it for a few hours, few days, and then once that's settled, it comes back down again. The other common reason is if people are struggling with nausea or sickness, and again, you'd have the medicines in the syringe driver to try and settle that down, and then once that improves, the syringe driver would stop again. So having a syringe driver doesn't necessarily mean, right, that must mean I'm dying.
And
I think as well,
I was just going to add to that I've had patients in the past that have, exactly as Sarah describes, they've been in bowel obstruction, and they desperately want to do something. One particular gentleman desperately wanted to see the sea, so he had a syringe driver, and that enabled him to have medicine to stop him feeling sick, some low-level pain control, and off he was able to go and do the thing that he wanted to do. He went on, and actually his bowel obstruction resolved, we sorted it out, and he was okay for some time afterwards. But it can be a really useful tool just to control symptoms, sometimes right at the end of life, but sometimes just during that sort of stage where you're struggling to manage your symptoms.
And I think I would say, sorry, Sarah, I was just going to add that actually from a family member's perspective, they aren't intrusive. And they are very easy to manage. They just do their thing. So my mum had a syringe driver, and the care team came out, they fitted it at home, it took 10 minutes, and then we didn't have to worry. They came back when it was time and reprimed it. And so actually it didn't get in the way. It wasn't difficult for us to manage. We didn't know it was there.
Yeah,
which I think
it kind of literally fits in your handbag most of the time. It's really not very big. I think the other thing is sometimes we do use a syringe driver to help with bowel obstruction. So we put medicines in perhaps to try and get the bowel moving a little bit more again. So it can actually be a treatment for that.
That's really well, I think that's a really thorough explanation of the syringe driver, and very, very useful. Exactly. So we've got another question here, which is, again, building on from what you were saying about people feeling nauseous. I've been feeling increasingly more nauseous, and I'm struggling to go to the toilet and wondering what that means. Now, we talked a little bit about constipation earlier, but I wonder if you could just, talk a little bit about what might be some of the causes of this.
Yeah, so Claire talked about all the sort of constipation things, and this is one where we want to make sure it might be constipation again. But actually, one of the things we might be worried about if you're starting to feel sick and being sick and not going to the toilet is whether your bowel might be obstructed. So whether there may be a blockage that you're not managing to pass stuff past. There's too many passes in that sentence. And it might be that it's just a partial blockage so that some stuff can get past. Or it might be a more complete blockage. And there are different things we can do for that. As I mentioned, sometimes it's about putting medicines into a pump that try and get the bowel going a little bit, or that try and calm the bowel down, because as well, sometimes what can happen is the bowel gets really kind of agitated and keeps trying to pass and just sort of goes into spasm. So trying to calm the bowel down a bit. But that's what we would do with medicines. And Claire, you might want to say a bit more about the non-medicines way of managing that.
Yes, yeah. So on occasion, it might be that the bowel is blocked, and we know that the patient is on what we describe as end-of-life care. And what you need to do at that stage is sit down, usually with your colorectal team. Actually, you might come as an outpatient, but more often you'll be admitted to hospital for this discussion, and a palliative care consultant might be involved as well, and a palliative care nurse or a colorectal nurse. And what we will do is lay out the options. So sometimes it's possible to insert something called a colonic stent. So if the bowel has narrowed down, causing that blockage, sometimes using a camera, a colonoscope, many of you will have had a test using one of those. It's possible for us to put a stent in, and it literally just opens up the bowel a little bit to allow the passage of stool, and it can be a really effective way of managing bowel obstruction. It's not always possible, but it is an option that your team will discuss with you if it is possible. The other thing that is sometimes suggested is a stoma. So if your bowel is blocked lower down, we bring out a piece of your bowel onto the surface of your tummy, and that's called a stoma. You wear a bag over that, and that means that the poo can come out above where the blockage is. So you're then able to use a bag, and that can give you a better quality of life for a while. So that can be really, really useful. And this should always be a discussion. So your team will talk to you about whether or not you want to do these options. Some people feel that they're just not well enough, and it will be a joint discussion between the person themselves, their loved ones, and the team looking after them about what the best options are. Sometimes the best option is just to rest the bowel, and it might be that you have a tube put down into your stomach, and whilst people really don't like the thought of that, actually I've had lots of patients who've been able to manage quite well with that, and with some of the medicines that Sarah's already described, and that's kind of got them through. So I think the message is there are options, and the most important thing is a really good discussion, and we're really used to having those discussions.
Yeah.
And guiding people through.
The importance of talking, recognizing when something's not right for you and talking to your team about it early on so that they can support and provide the right help.
It's a theme of the day already, isn't
it? Really is,
talking
isn't
to
it?
people, knowing who to talk to, trusting the health professionals that are responsible for your care, but also talking to your family and your supporters, your carers perhaps, so that they can have these conversations too.
And I think as Sarah said, sorry, I was just going to say, it's a real privilege for healthcare professionals to be involved in those discussions and to be able to have those discussions with people. So please don't ever feel, as Sarah said, that you shouldn't contact your team and say, or you shouldn't take their time, because it's an actual privilege to have those discussions.
And that's what you guys are there for, right?
Yeah.
And I think also the other lesson that I'm taking out of here is, if you don't understand something, say, what does that mean? I don't understand that word. Can you explain it another way? Yeah, really important.
So our next question is, I've been discharged from oncology and I've been told that the next stage for me is palliative care. How do I know how quickly things will change and what will happen next? Big question.
Great question, and one that I think everybody wants to know in that position. It can feel a really tricky time when the oncology team discharge you. You can feel sort of a bit thrown to the wind or a bit at sea, because you've been so used to your oncology team following you up. but there very much is still a team to look after you. It's just different people. So your GP and your district nurses will be your first point of call, but they may also involve people like myself from a hospice or a community palliative care team. I think talking about prognosis or that time scale is really difficult, and your oncologist may have given you a sort of rough guide about that. I think it's important to say that whenever anybody talks about a timescale, any health professional talks about it, it is just a best guess. We don't have the ability to see into the future, and so if we give you a number, I never give anybody a number, I talk in more general terms. It's just a guess, it's not the absolute fact. The easiest way to know how things are going to change is actually to look backwards over time and think about how you've been as time has gone on. So if I think about myself, I'm rapidly hurtling towards my 50s. I was able to do, unfortunately, a little bit more when I was in my early 20s. I could run a bit faster and run a bit further than I can do now. But things are changing over decades. They're not changing that quickly. As I get older, things will change more quickly. And I'll know that if I look back last year, I could do more than I can do this year. And when we get into the last year of life, things change more quickly again. So you look back over months and think, oh, actually last month I was able to be out and about and managing to go for long walks. This month I can't. Or it might be that you think, well, actually things are changing more quickly. Last week I could do more. And that gives you an idea of the speed of things. Things tend to keep changing at the same speed. And so you can see how things are changing. And your healthcare professionals are there to guide you with that as well, and to talk about that if you're not sure about it. Sudden things can happen. They happen to all of us. But generally, the most common way for things to happen is a gradual change over time. Does that make any sort of sense?
Absolute sense. It's I've never heard it framed that way, that looking back, and actually it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
The other thing I would just say is that particularly for bowel cancer patients, I often think it can be a bit confusing because there can be this toing and froing between oncology and palliative care, because we'll use, for example, a bit of palliative radiotherapy if somebody's having some bleeding from a tumour in their rectum. You might not be doing anything else active. So that, I think, can be a bit confusing. So always, again, seek that clarity about, right, well, why am I now going back to oncology? Are you going to do something, or is it what do you do? What's the purpose? And the second thing that I've experienced a lot in my practice is that people sometimes feel a bit frustrated. They get referred to palliative care, and they might, for example, ring their palliative care nurse and say, oh, my mum is now having this problem. It's, she's got this pain and she's not passing urine, or she's very breathless. Can you come, because I think this is it. And the palliative care team might say, actually, what you need is a doctor to come and look at your mum, or you need to take them to the hospital, or you need to ring your GP, and then it's not that they're being unhelpful, it's that they're trying to rule out what we call an easily reversible cause. So it might be an infection, or it might be a blood clot. It might be something that can actually be treated fairly easily, even if you have decided that you don't want to have resuscitation, but it might be something that's quite easy to treat. So I just always try and say to people, bear that in mind. They're not fulfilling what they've told you they were going to do. They're actually just trying to make sure that you're getting all the best care you can. That
is really, really good advice. It could just be something else. Do you want to do that?
No, because I know what's coming next. So we have to ask this question and then go to
that.
Okay. We'll get into trouble.
So we will do that. But I definitely don't want to get into trouble.
Let's not get into trouble. No. We're doing really well.
Yeah. We've got some questions. We've got some questions from our audience, which we will get to. But before we do, we've had another really important question, actually, which everybody wants to know, which is, how do I recognise the very end of life? And what should I expect? And who do I contact?
Brilliant question, and I think it's one that we all wonder about, because most of us, well, quite often we haven't been with somebody who's dying, and we definitely haven't died ourselves usually, so we don't know what to expect. Now, I think what we're going to do is show a video from Dr. Catherine Mannix, who brilliantly explains what normal dying looks like. Are we about to show that now?
My name's Catherine Mannix, and in my humble opinion, dying's probably not as bad as you're expecting. We've stopped talking about dying. We've stopped mentioning the D words. Instead of saying dead, we say passed or passed away. Instead of saying dying, we might say seriously ill. And families don't understand that death is approaching when those words are used. And that is in fact a bit of a problem for us. And so now a family will sit around the bed of somebody so sick that they will be dying and not know what to say. Not know what to say to each other, not know what to say to the dying person. And the dying person doesn't know what to say either, and doesn't know what to expect, wondering whether each breath might be their last breath. A scene of sadness and anxiety and despair. And in my humble opinion, it doesn't need to be like that at all. We've lost the rich wisdom of normal human dying, and it's time for us to talk about dying and reclaim the wisdom. What does normal dying look like? Well, dying like giving birth really is just a process. Gradually people become more tired, more weary. As time goes by, people sleep more and they're awake less. Families can learn when to give medicines and when to introduce visitors. But sometimes a visitor might happen or a medicine might be due during that sleep. And that's when we can discover that a change has taken place. It's tiny, but it's really significant. And it's that instead of just being asleep, this person has temporarily become unconscious. We can't wake them up. We can't give them that medicine. We can't tell them that that visitor is here. And yet when they waken later on, they tell us they've had a good sleep. So we know that this coma doesn't feel frightening, that lapsing into unconsciousness just isn't noticed by us when it happens. So as time goes by, people are awake less and asleep more, until eventually they're just unconscious all the time. We will be so relaxed that we won't bother to clear our throats. So maybe we'll be breathing in and out through little bits of mucus or saliva at the back of our throat. It can make a rattly, funny noise. People talk about the death rattle as though it's something terrible. But actually it tells me that my patient is so deeply relaxed, so deeply unconscious, that they're not even feeling that tickle of saliva as their air bubbles in and out through it from their lungs. So at the very end of somebody's life, there will be a period of shallow breathing and then one out-breath that just isn't followed by another in-breath. Sometimes it's so gentle that families don't even notice that it's happened. So normal human dying, just a really gentle process, something we can recognize, something we can prepare for, something we can manage. And this should be something we can celebrate. This is something we should be able to console each other with. But because it's become impolite to talk about dying, it's the really best kept secret in medicine. So, in my humble opinion, dying is something we should be reclaiming, we should be talking about, we should be consoling each other about. Please pass that on.
Right. I'm not sure what to say.
No,
I think Catherine said it all.
She did.
Actually.
She did.
Yeah, poignant words.
Said it very beautifully. So I hope that you found that useful. And I think it's very true that these conversations we've become, very reluctant to have them, and actually they're really important. So We're going to take a beat there and then have a look at
Take a breath.
have a look at the questions that you've been asking. We've got a few minutes and I'd love us to get through these because they're so important. The first question that we got actually is about lung tumours. If lung tumours are the only live cancer at the end, is that a painful death?
So short answer is probably not, no. I think as I touched on earlier, any sort of cancer doesn't necessarily cause pain. There might be some bits of pain, but usually that pain is something that we can manage. So just because there's cancer in the lungs doesn't mean that it's likely to be painful there. It might cause some breathlessness, and you might be prescribed some morphine to help with that breathlessness. So I wanted to mention that particularly because people think about morphine for pain, but morphine is also used to help when you're feeling breathless. It can help with that sensation of breathlessness. So it may be that your doctor might suggest that, but it's not guaranteed that there would be pain, no.
I hope that's put your mind at rest a bit, the person who asked that question. Another really good question we have is, my mum's in a hospice for symptom management with a view to coming home for the end of her life. She's never made a will or sorted out power of attorney, although we have broached the subject a few times. Her children are really keen that her wishes are granted following her death. Is this something that the hospice can talk to her about, or is it too late? It just feels horrible broaching the subject with her now. So it's a really good question.
Yeah. It is, and it is something that the hospice will be really experienced and used to talking to people about. It's kind of our bread and butter. So I'd encourage you, if you're worried about that, to have a chat with the staff yourself and explain how you feel and see if they can talk to your mum about it. If she is more sleepy and isn't able to talk about it, it may be more tricky. But if the hospice know that this is something your mum hasn't done and that it's really important to her and to you, they can use those moments in time when perhaps you're not there, when they're giving care, they may be helping her in bed and turning her or whatever. And sometimes those are little nuggets of time when they can actually get those things into conversation where it doesn't feel like a great big heavy conversation to sit down and do, so they can build on those conversations and have them over time.
And I think I would just pick up on the power of attorney bit, because that was part of the question. From my experience, so there are two types of power of attorney, isn't there? There's power of attorney for financial matters, and then there's power of attorney for medical decision making, healthcare. We started that process with both my mum and dad, and it took over 9 months for it to be processed. In fact, both mum and dad had died before power of attorney was granted. So I would say, if that's something that you think might be an issue, it's never too early to have that conversation and get that bit in motion, because it can take quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And power of attorney only kicks in legally, so you have to pay for it to be registered, for it to be active, and it only kicks in legally when you as a person lose the capacity to make your wishes known and understood. So right up, and not everybody will lose capacity, but up until that point the power of attorney won't kick in. What I sometimes say to people is if you're comfortable talking to your family and your friends and your health professionals about your wishes, sometimes just having those documented in your medical records or having your family comfortable that they know what you want actually covers the same bases as power of attorney. Because as health professionals, if you lose capacity, we have a responsibility to make decisions in your best interest. And in order to do that, we'll talk to the people that know you best. So if you've already talked to them and said, this is what I would want to happen if this came about, your family will tell the health professionals. So it doesn't always need the great big legal document. But you're right, Catherine, if you're going to do it, start early. I talked to my parents the other week when we were on holiday about how we should maybe all get that done.
Yes, there's quite a bit of paperwork involved.
Yes,
absolutely. So that's really, really helpful. We've got another question here, and I think we've got a few minutes in this session left, so we can answer it. But the question says, after getting less than 12 months left to live diagnosis, what should the person and family expect in terms of symptoms and process? How do things decline from there? What things should I expect? Is there anything specific or in particular for bowel cancer?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about how things change over time, and Catherine touched as well about actually people tend to gradually over time get more weary and more tired. So it changes more quickly in the last weeks of life, but you may find in the last year that you gradually are less able to do stuff. So you may spend more time sitting in the chair or not being able to get out of bed as much. There can be some things with bowel cancer, and Claire do jump in here, but more commonly the symptoms and the problems that we might see with bowel cancer are those things like the bowels not working quite as well at different times. So sometimes there might be blockages or partial blockages, or there might be difficulty with thickness or nausea or vomiting. And usually with most cancers, one of the commonest symptoms is losing weight or feeling fatigued, and that's common to most cancers. Have I missed anything, Claire?
No, I would just say for bowel cancer, it's difficult to answer more specifically without knowing what treatment you've had. And if some people have a tumour, will always have a bowel tumour. Some people will have had that removed, that have had an operation to have the bowel, what we call the primary cancer, removed. So it's difficult to say what your symptoms are likely to be without knowing that. You can ask your team, or the other thing I would say you can do if that is playing on your mind, please do just email. We've got an Ask the Nurse service, and if you give us, that's it, thank you, someone's put it up.
How did you do that? That was like magic.
Very good, it's like magic. If you just drop us a message just telling us a bit more about your own particular circumstances, we'll be able to give you a bit more specific guidance about what you can expect.
Brilliant. Thank you both for this session. It's been a really interesting session. It's kind of reaffirmed some of the messages from the earlier session, but actually also given some really practical advice on what to do when symptoms are perhaps causing more problems than they should.
I just noticed that in the chat that we've got from Judy, Catherine Mannix's book With the End in Mind is fantastic, as indeed is her book Listen, How to Find the Words for Tender Conversations. So thank you for that.
Definitely.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Well, there we go. So that feels like a good time to have another break, if for no reason other than for people to rush to Amazon and order that book, not on commission, I have to say, or go to the loo, have some cake, have a hug, maybe a cry. You know, this is tough stuff. And so we want to say a huge thank you to both Claire and Sarah for that session.
Thank you. And
we will be back with you at 1:45 for our next session, which is coping with the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis. And we're going to be hearing from someone who has been through that. So a really good session. Hopefully see you all then.
See you soon.
Bye. Hello and welcome back if you've been with us this morning, but welcome to our event, which is about preparing for the end of life. My name's Catherine and I'm Director of Services here at Bowel Cancer UK.
And I'm Genevieve and I'm Director.
Are you? What do you direct? Us.
I direct me. I'm the Chief Executive of Bowel Cancer UK. Momentarily forgetting myself there. I do apologise.
There was a moment there where there was a power vacuum, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Where anyone could have claimed it.
I don't know where I was going with that.
We can talk later.
Yeah.
So, welcome back. Our session in a moment, which we'll come on to, is where we're going to hear an interview with somebody who's received a diagnosis that is terminal. But just before then, just a little bit of housekeeping to remind everybody of. We are recording this event, so you will be sent the link afterwards for where to find us on our YouTube channel. And you were saying earlier, weren't you, that that's a great opportunity to catch up with it in your own time and share with other people, perhaps if there are things that you'd like people who are supporting you to know. So that's great. On your screen somewhere there will be a chat speech bubble, and if you click on that, that opens up a function whereby you can chat to all of us. You can chat to all the panelists and everybody in the audience. So that's where we'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing and hearing, things you're finding particularly interesting. There is also a question and answer function, Q&A, and that's where we'd love you to put any questions that you have for the panelists. So for our next session, Lizzie, who is going to be telling us about her experience and telling her story, isn't going to be available at the end to answer questions, but our other speakers, Sarah and Catherine, are going to be. So if you do have questions that sort of cross your mind during the video, then do pop them in the Q&A box and we'll ask them of our experts. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over into the very capable hands of Sarah, Catherine and Lizzie. So Lizzie Wright, whose story we're going to be hearing about. Lizzie's a member of our Never Too Young project group, which is a group of young people with bowel cancer. And they formed a project group to help support us in our campaigning work around younger patients and the difficulties and challenges that they face with getting a bowel cancer diagnosis. You may also have seen Lizzie quite recently on a Macmillan and Channel 4 documentary about surgery at the Marsden. She was in that, and she is also the absolute brains behind the social media channels of the Never Too Young group. Very grateful to Lizzie for sharing her story. So without further ado, here's Lizzie's story.
Hi Lizzie, thank you so much for joining us today and talking through your journey of living with cancer. I wonder if you might be able to introduce yourself.
So my name's Lizzie. I was diagnosed with cancer with stage 4 bowel cancer back in 2018 when I was 32, and I've basically been on some form of treatment or surgery or recovery from surgery ever since then, so for the last 4 years.
Thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate you giving up your time to talk to us all. I wonder if you might be able to start with talking through what happened when you were first diagnosed in 2018.
So I had been, from really the beginning of 2018, I was beginning to feel a bit out of sorts, quite exhausted. Just not 100% a lot of the time. And then from about April, I started having blood in my stool, and I noticed a bit of a change in my bowel habits. So I went to the GP, who referred me on for a colonoscopy. But in the meantime, I actually got very sick very, very quickly. So within the space of about a month, I went from being almost like normal and fine and working to sort of being hospitalized and being really unwell. So it was when I was in hospital, I found out I had stage 4 bowel cancer. So at that point it spread to my liver and my lungs, and I was really anemic. I needed a few blood transfusions, and I was needing lots of antibiotics because my body was sort of beginning to shut down, I think. So luckily I was able to start chemotherapy very quickly, actually. So within 2 or 3 weeks I started on chemotherapy, and then I had 6 months of chemotherapy, and that made me, then I was able to have some surgery. So throughout 2019 I had 2-stage liver resection, and a bowel resection, and an ileostomy, and then an ileostomy reversal. That was all during 2019, and then I had a recurrence. So at the start of 2020 I had a recurrence, and at that point it had come back in quite a lot of places, including my lungs again, my peritoneum, some lymph nodes, lots of places. And then since then, so that was the start of 2020, I've basically been on chemos almost the whole time since then. So I went back on Volfury, and then had something capecitabine, which is like a maintenance treatment, for a bit over a year. And then I had another recurrence sort of October last year, and then I went back on Volfury, and then I had some surgery in January, and then more Volfury, and then I've actually been off Volfury since June, and I had some liver ablation 3 weeks ago. So that's where I am now. So a lot of treatment.
A lot of treatment, the real roller coaster by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it is.
I wonder if I can follow up, actually, Lizzie.
Yeah.
You mentioned having the chemotherapy, and I just wondered if you could share what kind of symptoms and what your experience was of starting the chemo and then having regular batches of the chemotherapy.
Yeah, so I find Volfury, I do find that a very hard regime, a lot harder than capecitabine, I found. So I did get quite a lot of nausea with it, and sort of really bad bowels. So it's over, the regime's normally given over 2 weeks, and I'd find the first week quite bad. I'd have a lot of fatigue, and so I'd have nausea for the first few days, and then I'd sort of have bad bowels then for a few days afterwards. So I'd sort of have a bad week, but then a good week after that where I'd feel quite a lot better, and I could kind of do a lot more as normal. So they're the main symptoms, but I would say when you, at the start of any chemo regime, you're given like a whole list of symptoms, from nosebleeds to sore hands and feet to, I don't know, lots of bizarre things. And I'd say at one point or another, I've had every single symptom you probably can have. I've had alopecia, I've had, I don't know, everything you can think of linked to chemo. I probably have suffered from at some point, and sometimes it's worse. So on the capecitabine, the main thing with that is this hand and foot syndrome people can really struggle with, and I had it, but not as bad as some people. Like I was generally able to walk, and sort of I was able to keep on that treatment.
And I wonder how it affected people in your life around you. Tell us a bit more around you as a person and what your life looks at, and who's in it.
Yeah, so I live with my husband. We were actually engaged when I was first diagnosed, and we got married. We'd been planning, we had it all booked. We got married about 9 months after my diagnosis. So it was, I mean, it was an amazing day, but it was like quite a big thing to work towards during that first year, and felt very special. So I live with my husband, and we now have a cat who we've had for 3 years. And And then I have family who live quite nearby, so I'm quite lucky because I've not been able to work. I was a teacher when I was first diagnosed, but yeah, having treatment and primary school teaching don't really go, especially with COVID and everything. So yeah, I've actually taken ill health retirement now, but it means I can spend a lot more time with my family. So I have, yeah, my mum lives nearby and my stepmom, and I've got quite a lot of brothers and sisters, and I've got a niece and nephew, so it means I can see them most weeks, and that's really nice. I think I'd find it a lot more difficult if I didn't have that. And my mum's always been there for support as well. She's a retired nurse, so she's yeah, quite comfortable in hospitals and coming to appointments with me if my husband can't make it. So you asked about how, I mean, obviously it was quite devastating for my family. And yeah, it was just such a shock when I was first diagnosed, is that thing you never see coming. But they've been, yeah, a great support to me. And actually my friends too. I think a lot of people, you hear people say like, oh, when you get diagnosed with cancer, you really find out who your friends are. And my friends have all been great. I think I've got a really good group of friends who have been supportive, but also, you know, not really treated me much differently because I'm on treatment, and I think that's important as well. So, and yeah, I still enjoy seeing friends and family a lot.
How did you approach telling friends and family?
So with family generally, like, so my family were there really when, well, my mum and my husband and stuff were there when I got the news anyway, so I didn't need to break it to them. I think my mum probably told most of my family. My stepmum told, my dad's no longer with us, but my stepmum probably told most people on that side, so I didn't necessarily have to have those conversations with my siblings and things. And then I did tell friends. I actually called most of my closer friends and then text other friends. I didn't sort of do the big public Facebook announcement. I was actually quite quiet for a couple of years on Facebook about my diagnosis. I'm not now, but I think everybody's different. In some ways, I think it's a bit easier because the one thing about not doing big public announcements or on Facebook or sending out emails is it means you do have to tell people individually, and sometimes I think it might be easier if I did just have a WhatsApp group or something where I could keep people updated on, and maybe I still will in the future. But yeah, I think especially for when I was first diagnosed, I wanted to talk to my friends, and what I found was if I text people, they would just call me anyway. So it's better for me to call them at a time that I felt up to speaking about it.
And you mentioned you have a niece and nephew. Did you have any sort of thoughts about how you approached talking to them about it?
So they're both quite young still. My niece is 3. They've both been born since my diagnosis, actually. So my niece is 3 and my nephew's only 18 months. So obviously he doesn't know any different. I think my niece, actually, we went on holiday about a month ago, and she saw my scars. I have a lot of abdominal scars. And she saw them for the first time and was quite interested in them. And I think afterwards she went and asked my brother, because I'd said about that I'd had some operations. So I think it's her who in the next year or two will probably start asking more questions about it. So yeah, I haven't really thought about how I will go around talking about it with her though. She's quite inquisitive, so.
Like 3-year-olds are.
Yeah, and very chatty and very, so I'm sure it will come up in conversation. She won't have forgotten that I have these scars on my tummy, let's put it that way.
You mentioned sort of different phases, so I just wondered if you could talk us through the impact that having the initial diagnosis, and then you mentioned sort of working through and then coming through to having the recurrence. I just wondered, impact on, you obviously went from being very active and being a primary school teacher, and how things have changed for you and how you worked through that, how it was for you.
Yeah, I mean, it had a huge impact straight away. So like I said, I'd sort of been very well and still working, but kind of beginning to not feel quite right. I really couldn't work out what was wrong. And so I stopped. I mean, I kind of left work one day thinking I'd be back, thinking, oh, I might not be in tomorrow, and then never went back. And that's quite a weird thing to think about, really. But for the first 18 months, I was hoping to go back to treatment. But when you're first diagnosed, everything's quite a whirlwind. And because I was quite unwell, it was really nice, but I had people all around me, and everybody wants to see you at first and wants to so for the first sort of few months, I barely had a moment to myself. And I was also used to working full time and working like a 50-hour week. So it was like, oh, this is quite nice that I've got this time on my hands and I can, I do these things. I wouldn't really say I got very bored for the first, and because I was quite unwell, I was needing to nap a lot. So most afternoons I would nap. Then you've only really got your morning to fill. And yeah, I saw friends or families most days. So that was sort of the first few months, and then the following, like I said, during 2019, I had a lot of surgery, and then we were hoping that I would go back to teaching sort of at early 2020, which is when I had my recurrence. And that really, I think, not that was harder than the initial diagnosis, are just different, because when you have the recurrence, it's when you really know this is the rest of my life. So that sort of hit me really hard, I think. So that meant that at that point I had to look at my options in terms of working and ill health retirement. And then COVID happened, and COVID was a really difficult time for everyone, and especially if you were like living on treatment, because you really had to isolate, and we were shielding. So not only I wasn't working, and I kind of, all the other things that I'd done to fill my life, like seeing friends and family and enjoying myself, I wasn't able to do that either. So I did find that really hard. And at the same time, I was then having to look into what ill health retirement looks like for teachers, and I just found it very complicated, because I didn't know what pensions were. I never needed to know, and I didn't find it a very simple, like there was no one really there to hold my hand through it and explain what everything meant. I really had to work it out myself. So that took a while. And to get that all, to work through that all and work out what my options were, and then to decide what option to go for, and then to get all the paperwork filled out, it did take another year really. So that took me until 2020, July 2021, I became retired, and it seemed like such a big deal to me. And then the moment I'd retired, actually, I never looked back, and it was like, not one of the best things I've done. That's not but like definitely I was very ready for it, and it meant it's a lot less than what I was earning, but I do get a wage every month, and I'm going to get that however ill I am. So that since taking it, I've never really thought twice about it. So obviously my life looks very different to how it looked before. And then during during COVID, I started doing online art classes, and they've been really good for me to sort of fill my time, especially during all the lockdowns. So I was doing drawing and painting, and then when things have got a bit better, I have done pottery as well. So that's been a good way for me to fill my time since diagnosis.
How did you decide on those things that you were doing? It sounds like you had sort of almost two different mindsets. Almost there was the sort of diagnosis mindset and the way that was, and then the recurrence mindset and sort of working out what to do after you gave up work. How did you decide what you were going to do? What approach did you take to that?
Do you mean after the recurrence?
Yes, after you decided, after you sorted all the work.
It did take quite a lot of time, because I think like that whole period for me, so it was 3 years before I took ill health retirement from my first diagnosis to actually taking it. So it does all take time to process things. And I think some people I've met, maybe they don't necessarily see that, or people say, oh, like I've worked through stuff, and I have, but that does all take time to do. This time 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to speak as openly, or I would have found it a lot more upsetting talking about taking the ill health retirement. And then, like I said, COVID did make things a lot more difficult, because I think I would have looked at other things, like, I don't know, voluntary work, or doing things more in person. And so it really was like, well, if there is COVID, what can I do? Art is something I always enjoyed when I was younger, and it's something that's always come fairly naturally to me. Like some people, that's I don't know, music or writing, and for me it's been art. But I never really did much art after sort of my GCSEs. So I don't really know how I came round to deciding on art, to be honest. It was sort of what was available. It's something you can do at home. So yeah, I just looked at what was available locally with the local adult education centres, and at the time almost everything was online. So that made it quite easy. Since actually most things have moved back into class, but I found definitely the drawing and painting I've actually tried to continue doing online, and luckily my teacher still offers one class online, so I can do that just because it works better around treatment, and it means if I'm having a bad bowel day or something, it's a lot easier for me to just join online rather than make it to a centre. So yeah, definitely looking at online, what classes are available online is I recommend that to other people.
Sounds like you've got the sort of lovely balance of seeing family and friends are really important to you, and then having a sort of creative outlets at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, I would. And I'd actually, something else that I think is important is something that the art classes have given me is that structure, like a weekly structure, because it can be a bit scary. I don't know if scary is the right word, but when you have a whole week and you have nothing on. So like on Mondays, my mum looks after, it's now my nephew, but she was looking after my niece before that. And so I know like on a Monday, I can go and see mum. I was trying to do 2 classes a week. I can basically, if I'm on the CAPES maintenance treatment, the CAPES ITB, I can manage that. But on the Full Fury, I even find 2 classes a week a bit too much, because I'm ill half the time basically. So yeah, if I know I'm doing a class on a Tuesday and a Thursday, then it doesn't look like it's not, if actually none of my friends are free that week, it means I have other time. And actually, so my husband works from home now as well, half the time, and since COVID, and that's actually also made a real difference. I did find it at the beginning, I found he was still going into the office 5 days a week and leaving at 7 a.m. every day, and I did find that quite difficult. And he wouldn't get back till like 7 at night, and so it would mean I'd be alone for 12 hours a day if I didn't make plans and that. Whereas now, if he's at home, I'm perfectly happy sort of pottering around the home, maybe doing a bit of art and yeah, having lunch with him, and he's done by 5, and then we can do something maybe.
That's because it's splitting your day up and having little bits of fabulousness.
Yeah,
to
yeah, definitely, and yeah, like not getting up so early. Yeah, I do like if I have a day where I don't have much planned, I sometimes stay in my pajamas till 9 or 10, and
wouldn't we all?
Also part of a way, you know, if you get up at 7 and breakfasted and done by 8, you've got more time to fill. Oh, like I've done a lot of, I'm not doing it so much now, but a lot of online yoga actually as well. That's been quite good. So I was getting into the habit of doing, I've got out of the habit now, but of doing sort of trying to do it every day, or at least like 3 times a week or something.
So interesting. I was just thinking, were there things that you experienced that people did that annoyed or frustrated you? Were there particular things that they did or didn't do that you thought, oh, I wish you'd stop asking that or doing something?
There's a few things. I think my friends aren't, again, this is something you read more, that I'll hear other people saying that their friends do. But yeah, a few things like, I guess, just giving not unwanted, but like, unwanted advice about sort of, oh, I read that you can try this diet, or you should have loads of vitamin C, or you can try this and that. And I mean, it's hard, but when you are on treatment, yeah, I really follow what my medical team say, and what their advice is. And yeah, often it isn't as simple as just cutting sugar out, or I mean, definitely, yes, live as healthy a lifestyle as you can, but I mean, when you have bowel cancer, it is very difficult to it can be very difficult to eat a lot of foods. And I'm vegetarian and I love vegetables, but like it can be very difficult to eat healthily and eat what I want to eat. And you have to sort of, we've got so much to worry about and so much to think about that, yeah, I try not to overthink. If I want to eat cake or if I want to eat something, then I should just eat it, like, and not beat myself up about it. Like that's probably the main thing. And then I find it a bit odd sometimes when I meet up with people I've not seen in a while, and they also ask me nothing about my treatment. Like, I don't want to talk about it too much, but I also find it a bit strange when people just don't talk about it at the same time. And I know they don't know where I'm at with treatment and because I've not seen them, and I find that a little bit odd.
How do you handle that?
I was going to ask exactly the same thing. How do you handle that?
It depends on how the conversation's going. If there's something I feel somebody needs to know, then I would tell them. But yeah, I do find it a little bit odd. There was something else that I thought of, but it's gone now. I think people sort of just not completely understanding that you have to live scan to scan, and so you can't really plan stuff for like 6 months time because you don't know what's going to happen, and even longer term. So, you know, making decisions about, I don't know, if we're going to move house or not move house, or if we're going to, things for holidays, or I don't know. It's, I don't think people quite understand that. I think they're getting better though, but it's taken a while to sort of understand that.
And do you you raise that with them? It sounds a bit like with what you were talking about, you sort of you pick your battles. So the sort of food thing, you're accepting that, you know, I'm just going to have to handle it. I wonder when people don't do things, you know, when they give you unsolicited advice, or when they aren't quite understanding the planning stuff. Do you tackle that with them, or do you let it go? Or?
I'd say I haven't really needed to. I'm not very confrontational, so I probably haven't necessarily. If there was someone who was repeatedly doing things that were annoying me, and maybe I'm fairly, being a teacher, I'm probably am fairly. Maybe I have done it without really without
confrontation,
without having to have, or bringing things up without having to have a confrontation about it. I probably have done it, but I've never needed to really be direct about it, I would say. But I think it is important, if you need to be clear with people, like, when you're the one on treatment, you need to be clear with people what you need and what you don't need, and what's helpful and what's not helpful. And if, it is good to be clear if you can be.
It sounds like a really tricky balance to strike, because it sounds like people are probably trying to help them with the best of intentions. And
I would say as well, that's sort of going along, I think something I've definitely realised after years of, and I was always somebody who was quite like a motherly figure, and I worried about everybody and their emotions. And I think actually I definitely, this is going to sound really harsh and like I'm a horrible person, but it's not my job to manage other people's feelings. And I think maybe it's taken me years to like, and it's not just around cancer, around other things, but that obviously I'm not overly harsh to people, but I think you need to be honest to a certain extent, and this will upset them. And my whole experience probably has upset a lot of my friends and family, but like that is they need to deal with that. It's not your job to deal with their emotions around that. If that, I mean,
it makes sense, and it doesn't sound harsh at all. And I'm just wondering how you sort of managed to sort of get to that, because I think that's something that a lot of people worry about, that not upsetting people or not. Was there a sort of light bulb moment where you realised that, or was it been a gradual thing?
It's probably a gradual thing. I mean, I guess so. They're going to find it difficult moving forward. Things are going to get difficult, and they need to know that, I think, is probably, and maybe they need to know that, they need to know that things are going to be difficult in the future, and maybe working through some of those emotions now will make it easier in the future as well, and make them understand our situation better, and maybe what they need to do to in that situation as well.
And obviously the future's a big thing, and what about on a day-to-day basis? What are your favourite things to do? What matters most to you?
Lots of things. That's something I definitely would say. I was always good about this anyway, but just really appreciating what you have. And it is about the small things in life that sort of make up your whole fabric of your life. It's not, I've never written a bucket list, and I've never said I want to do this, this and this before, while I still can, because for a start, it's partly because life is so unpredictable now that planning anything is quite difficult, So for example, we got married, I mentioned over 3 years ago now, and we still haven't been on our honeymoon. And whilst that would, we really want to, and we're hoping maybe we can go later this year, like, I'm kind of moved on from that now because it's not within my control with the whole situation with my treatment and with COVID, and I don't want to sort of get upset or be down about it, because I have all sorts of other wonderful things that we have done in the last few years that so yeah, I'd say it's about the small things in life. Yeah, the cups of tea and cake, and the evenings on the sofa with my husband, or having walks in the countryside, or sharing a glass of wine with friends. Like, those are the things that, yeah, I guess I want to stay alive for as long as possible, and to have as many of those experiences as possible. So yeah, all those things make me happy. Seeing the sea, that makes me happy. Yeah, and spending time with my family, my niece and nephew. Yeah, those things.
It sounds like, as Catherine said, you're having lots of moments of fabulousness that you're.
Yeah, and I would say, like, that's, yeah, if you're not having enough of those moments in your day or in your week, I think that's something that, yeah, you should look at and you should address, because, and that's for anyone, not just people with stage 4 cancer. Like, it is those things that are important. I think COVID has shown that to a lot of people though as well, what really is important and really makes you happy. Yeah,
I'm definitely with you on cake, by the way.
Yeah.
We have another session just about cakes and cake off and favourite cakes. Just eating, sampling. But I wonder, on a sort of last note, you say so clearly about some of the things that have been helpful, and I wondered if you've got any practical advice and tips, maybe for people that are going through sort of similar experiences, what things really helped you, what you may recommend that helped you.
So just as much as you can, take each day as it comes, because things are so unpredictable. You don't know how you're going to feel all the time, and you don't probably know what's next, really. So yeah, just try to live in the moment as much as possible. So I don't like the word accept, because I'd say acknowledge is probably a better word, but acknowledging that you don't have control anymore. I'd say that's something around making a decision about ill health retirement. That's what I had to really acknowledge, was that I don't have control anymore. I'm not going to know what's next, ever. And so, yeah, you've got to sort of work your life out based on that, and that is really difficult. But I think at least acknowledging it, it's liberating in some ways as well. I think that's probably, yeah, that all those what ifs, what I think for the first year or two, what if this happens, what if that happens, and I guess I worked, what am I trying to say, like, you kind of can drive yourself crazy asking, well, what if I'm on this treatment then? What if this happens? What if that happens? And you're not going to know. So you can drive yourself crazy thinking about all of those scenarios that can happen. And so just work with what you know right now. And yeah, and make decisions based on that. Treatment is important. And I think I have, one of the things that me not working has meant is that I can devote not my whole time. I obviously have other things in my life, but if I need to make a scan or an appointment, or if my chemo changes, it's not a big deal for me, because I can just make an appointment whenever I need to, and I think that has actually really helped me get as far as I've got with my treatment, and because I can react to things quickly and dedicate my time to treatment. Be kind to yourself, probably another thing. I just don't beat yourself up about things. There's a lot, I think we all can feel a lot of guilt around having cancer, what it means for the people around us, but it is worse for you. So yeah, and try and do as many nice things as you get, those things that bring you joy on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis, that you can.
Were there any courses or anything sort of local to you, or any?
Yeah, so a new Maggie's has opened up near me, and they're great. So if you haven't ever been to a Maggie's centre, they're beautiful as well. They're always like amazing architecture, and they're really helpful, the people inside. So I'm really glad I found my local Maggie's. But there are other cancer centres as well. And I think I hadn't realised how close some of them were to me, and the support that they offer. So I definitely look at them. I've never really had much interaction with my local hospice, but I know that they aren't just for people at the very end of life. They would offer anybody in like my situation support as well if I needed it. I did go to a course at Penny Brawn, which is like a cancer centre in Bristol, and I think you might have to pay something now, or I don't know if they're still offering them, but they used to offer residential courses, and you went with a group of other patients and talked about lots of things from diet to mindfulness to practical like living with cancer to family, and that was a really good thing. So it was, I think it was 2 days. I think I stayed there 2 nights, and that was really, and it's a really nice building, and they offer the courses for anybody over the country. You don't just have to live in Bristol to go. I'd say they're the main things. I said, so I do online yoga with a lady called Vicky Fox, and she does special cancer classes. They're very good as well.
And anything for things like sleep or feeling anxious or feeling?
Yes, sleep. I have had sleep problems on and off. Not the whole time, but the last like 2-3 years I have. I find like podcasts, there's like sleep podcasts that really help me. So I listen to a couple of different ones, but they generally tell like a nice calming story that's probably a little bit dull, but like not much happens in them. They'll talk in a lot of detail about lovely things. So the ones I listen to, one's called Nothing Much Happens, and the other is it's gone. Sleep. Get Sleepy, that's what it's called. Get Sleepy. Again, the chemo, another thing, that stuff just goes out of my head. Yeah, because I find at night is when I've had some very like long, lonely nights, I'd say, especially on treatment, and you could be all over the place, and hormones are all over the place, and that's when you can really spiral, I'd say, and start thinking bad thoughts, and you can't get yourself out of that. I know a lot of people actually try online shopping as well, but sleep casts are cheaper, and yeah, I've never really got. I know some people like do lots of shopping late at night online, but I don't. So yeah, I'd say they actually, and they're quite good at now. now my brain's used to listening to them, that generally they will send me to sleep within 5 or 10 minutes once I start listening to them. And if I don't, at least I've got something to listen to.
I think I might try one myself.
Yeah, they are really good, I would say. Yeah, those two that I use. And they release new ones every week, so you're not listening to the same stories the whole time.
It's so helpful, and it's incredibly interesting listening to all the things and how you've tackled each part of and different things that come up at different times. I just want to say thank you. You've spoken for just so beautifully about all of it for quite a while. Is there anything else that you wanted to tell us that we haven't asked about, or Sarah, any questions from your perspective?
No, I'm the same feeling. It's been really personally helpful for me to listen, and I've certainly taken some learning myself. So I'm just really grateful for you spending the time talking to us. It's been the best hour of my day so far.
Oh, good. I hope, yeah, I hope it does help some people. I think the two things maybe I would want to say is, like, yeah, I've been diagnosed 4 years now, and I have had a lot of time to think through things like this. And I think maybe had I been a year or two into my journey and seen someone watching this, I might have, well, why aren't I able to talk about things in such a way? And it does take time. And I'm lucky I've had that time as well, because there's a lot of people diagnosed when I was in 2018 with stage 4 bowel cancer haven't had that time. So, and then the other point I haven't really said, but when you're diagnosed, you get told you're incurable and inoperable and palliative, and those words are huge, but they don't always necessarily mean the things. Like palliative doesn't mean end of life. Inoperable just means you're inoperable right then. It doesn't, I didn't understand that. I thought that it meant I'd never have an operation, whereas I've now had 5 operations. And so I think that's important. And incurable, yeah, but there is amazing things going on all the time in science, and there are a lot of things in the arsenal for bowel cancer, and I think it's important to remember that. But yeah, I hope it has helped some people.
Absolutely. And so yeah, really incredibly grateful, and love the positive, just as you radiate a lot of positivity. So I'm sure that's incredibly helpful for people to hear about, and completely agree. There are advances happening all the time. So
yeah,
thank you very much for sharing your time and story.
Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Thanks.
Wow.
That was really, really fascinating, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. Felt like a real privilege to hear Lizzie talking about her experience. And, you know, I work with Lizzie on and off, you know, on a fairly regular basis, but I heard her say things in that session that I'd not heard her say before.
Yes. Yeah. Lots to take from that as well. And I'm really delighted that we've got Sarah and Catherine here to talk about that conversation. And obviously, if there's any questions that anybody, or any comments that people would like to make, having heard Lizzie's story, and anything that resonated with you, that you, or anything that you would like to share about how you have gone through a similar journey, or maybe a different one, we'd love to see them. I personally love the idea of moments of fabulousness in your day. I think that's such a
pretty good thing to take on board, irrespective of your health status, isn't it? We should all have moments of fabulousness.
Yeah, I agree. I just thought it was really lovely. It's like scattering the little trail of breadcrumbs little things to look forward to. It's wonderful.
And I do have an amazing mental picture now of the hotspots of online shopping happening all over the UK in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. I like the sleep casts. I'm definitely going to explore those.
I think the other
Sarah,
thing for me, oh sorry, go on.
No, go on. I was going to say, any thoughts from you?
And it was such a privilege. You're absolutely right. A theme about cake, wasn't there? Clearly, cake is very important in life. But the other thing for me that really resonated, thinking about all the people I look after, was two things. One was that not being responsible for other people's emotions. It's really hard to feel like that because we love and care for people, don't we? But I think some of the things we have to go through are painful, and there isn't a way of necessarily protecting people from that, and actually getting through that and allowing people to experience that emotion. You can actually, as we've been talking today, really, having those difficult conversations can actually bring you to a place of feeling in control and feeling, relieved about knowing that some things are sorted. But I see so many people struggling with that and kind of avoiding or putting off the conversations because they're worried about the emotions that other people are going to experience. So I think it was really helpful to hear that. And also that term that Lizzie used, acknowledging rather than accepting, I thought that was really helpful and sort of a great tip for coping with life in general, really, isn't it? That's kind of coming to terms with things.
And that was something that Deborah James talked about, wasn't it? Quite recently, a story that I'm sure we're all aware of. We've seen it in the news that I read somewhere that she talked about, I'm not okay with it and I'm not ready for it, but I acknowledge that it is where I am. Obviously, big stuff to get your head around. So a really nice way to frame that, I think. Catherine, any final thoughts from you?
I suppose my real thought is that everybody's unique, and I love all the detail of Lizzie's story and how along her journey she took particular ways of handling things, particular thoughts about how she'd maybe have conversations with family and little ones, niece and nephew, and just, I suppose, that it's okay, whatever those feelings are, and that it is different and difficult for different people. And again, that's okay. And sometimes you don't want to talk about things and other people do really want to talk about it. So I think it's just finding the you inside, what matters most to you inside you, and to be able to talk about it when it's okay for you. And I think kind of embracing that, I think, is really important, that I got from Lizzie. So no, thank you.
And thank you both for all your contribution today. We've really, really valued having you.
And thanks to Lizzie, who's not here to hear us say thank you, but we of course will be saying huge thank you.
Huge thank you to Lizzie for everything that she's done.
So I don't think we see you both again now. So again, just to reiterate what Jen's just said, thank you so much for all the hard work that you've put into helping us bring this event together today. It's been a really quite groundbreaking event.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege for us to have been working with you both. So thank you.
A huge thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Anytime. So we are hurtling towards the close. We've got a couple more very short sessions now. Our first session is just going to take a look at support that's available out there for you facing the decisions around how you want to prepare for the end of life and how you support other people too. So I'm delighted to welcome Nadia, who's going to take us through this session. Nadia is a content writer and editor in Marie Curie's information and support team. She's got a wealth of experience in this field, and Nadia, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to wait for the invite to come through so I can share. Okay, great. I'm just using a couple of screens today, so apologies if I look like I'm looking elsewhere. It's just I've got my notes on one screen. So thank you so much for that intro. As I said, my name's Nadia. I work in Marie Curie's information and support team. I work on the information side of things, so I write and edit our online and printed content. And today I'm just going to talk to you about how the information and support team can help you, and also to let you know about the resources we have on the topics that we've heard about today. So this slide is just to show you where information and support sits within Marie Curie. We're part of caring services, and as you can see, the other caring services include nursing and hospice care and the helper or the companion service. So this is just a sort of an overview of the types of services that we have within information and support. All of these are, of course, free, and they're available to absolutely anyone affected by terminal illness. And it's important to know that we are here to help everyone at any stage, and not just end of life. You do not have to have accessed or be accessing Marie Curie care to use these. So we have a support line, bereavement service, check-in and chat service, and our online and printed information about all aspects of terminal illness. So I'm just going to go into how the information and support services can help you, and just explain a little bit more over the next couple of slides. So first up, our support line. It's open Monday to Saturday and on bank holidays. If you want to have a look at the opening times, they're on our website. You can access the support line in a number of different ways, as shown on the left-hand side of this slide. And if you're living with a terminal illness or you're supporting someone who is, the support line can help you. We have trained support line officers and nurses on the line, so you can get help with a lot of different things: practical issues, financial information. Some people call purely for emotional support, through to medical and care queries, and much more. And this is just a few that I've listed here. So like I say, people really do call about all matter of issues and queries, and we are able to help or signpost to other organisations that can. And I just wanted to share some feedback we've had from people that have used the support line over the last few weeks. So I'll just read that top one. I wanted to thank the person I spoke to about my brother. He was diagnosed with bowel cancer last year, and I just want to thank her for speaking with me and letting my tears flow. So the next service I'm going to talk about is the bereavement service. So it's for people who would like to have ongoing support from the same volunteer over the phone. You can access up to 6 telephone sessions of 45 minutes. When people start using the service, they're matched with a specially trained volunteer, and they provide a safe space to talk openly about bereavement and anything else worrying you. Again, I've just put a little bit of feedback there just so you can see how it's helped people. Our next service is the check-in and chat service. So this is a little different. Again, it's a telephone service, and it provides ongoing emotional support, the same person each week. It's for people living with a terminal illness and those close to them. And for this service, you can access up to 12 weekly sessions from a trained volunteer. Again, they provide a listening ear, and it's very much a safe space to talk. All the sessions are, of course, confidential and offer a non-judgmental space to discuss your feelings and emotions around your situation and end of life. Again, I've just left a little bit of feedback there. So onto our online and printed information. This is the final information and support service I want to tell you about today. So this includes our online and booklet information. I've just included a quick screenshot here so you can see the main areas we cover, like living with a terminal illness, caring for someone, benefits and finances, etc. And within each of those areas, there are lots of pages on all different aspects of terminal illness. for example, symptom management, how to get your benefits claim fast-tracked, and we have a benefits calculator, and much more. I've put this here just to get across how our information can help you. This is some feedback we've had from our online survey, and I think just one of the best ways to show people how it does help other people is to share feedback. So I'll leave that up for a few seconds just so you can have a read of a few of them. I think the main thing to note, the main sort of feedback that we get from across all of our services is that people seek out a way to, or people to speak to away from their family, their support network and their friends. Sometimes people just need that different ear, that different scenario in which to share their feelings and concerns. They feel like they can be completely honest, whereas some people may not feel like that they can do that, and they may feel guilty about sharing certain things with their family and upsetting people and things like that. So that's sort of a really big theme across our services. So I'm going to move on to sharing some specific resources that we have on the topics that have been spoken about today. And firstly, we have making practical arrangements, so passing away at home, funeral organisation, demedicalising end of life, things like that. So we have a lot of web pages and booklets relevant to all of the topics that have been discussed today, but what I've done for this presentation is just to list a few of our key ones. And the links will be provided for all of these and all the other resources that I mentioned. Bowel Cancer UK will be providing those for you. So you've got what to expect in the last weeks and days of life, organising a funeral and practical things to do when someone dies. These are all very sort of well visited pages, and people's feedback is that how much this sort of has broken things down for them, having that practical information there so that they don't have to think about all the different things to do. We do also have information on organising your own funeral, and again, this is a really well visited page people find really helpful just to have that information there to start thinking about those arrangements. This screenshot is just to show you just how many pages we have on controlling symptoms. So if what I speak about today, the resources I share today, if that's not something that you need, please go onto our website. You're bound to find information on what you're looking for. And if you can't, just give our support line a call and they'll be able to help you. So the resources I'm showing today are resources on pain, fatigue and syringe drivers. We have a number of pages on pain. People understandably have so many different questions about pain and pain management. And again, you can find all of these on our website and the links will be shared. We also have booklets on these and these are available to order online or via the support line. Coping with the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis. So again, these are just some of our key resources on this topic. As you can see there, we've got coping with a terminal illness, supporting someone with a terminal illness, and grieving in your own way. And our sort of key booklets in this area are coping with grief when someone dies, and we have some easy read booklets. So these are often used by people with learning disabilities, for example. And a really sort of popular one we've got is when someone dies, feelings you might have, in our easy read booklets. So moving on to just further resources. Lots of people don't like reading web pages or booklets, and they prefer to get their information via videos or some other means. So I've put some of our sort of key videos here. There's just a few, and the grief toolkit in the top left there is a video with Julia Samuel and Dr. Catherine Mannix. And this video is where they talk about tools and practices to help people manage loss and to manage conversations around death and grief. And this is obviously a really difficult topic and people often don't know where to start. So if you're looking for information on that, I do recommend looking at the grief toolkit. As you can see, we've also got a video from someone called Paula, and she shares her experience of palliative care. We've also got a video about what to expect at the end of life. And how does grief feel? People share their experiences of grief and loss. people find these videos helpful because many of them could be so relatable, and lots of people have said they sort of help them feel less alone in their experiences. So that's it from me for today. Thank you so much for listening. As I said, links to all the resources, web pages that I've told you about will be made available by Bowel Cancer UK. Thank you very much.
Nadia, thank you. Thanks so much for highlighting some of those really useful and really, very well put together resources. And some of them are resources that have been referenced throughout the videos that you'll be able to see on YouTube, and you'll get the links through after the event too. So we're nearly there. We've had a Marie Curie resources plug, so I think it's only fair that we now do a Bowel Cancer UK resources plug. So this is just a little update from us on some of the ways that we can support.
Oh,
hello. Right.
There we are.
I'm always too trigger happy. Okay, so first up, we have our Facebook groups. We run a number of online Facebook groups for particular patient groups. So there's a Living with Stage 4 group. There's also one for caregivers, and you can see a couple of others there. If you'd like to know more about them and join up, then you can access that via our website and the online communities page. Now, I have a feeling I skipped a slide. No, I didn't. Okay, online communities normally comes first. It's here now. So we have a huge online community of support, and that's our forum, and that's a really great space for people to either sign up and post yourself. You can ask questions, and you can share experiences, or you can just visit the forum and just have a read of what other people are talking about. It's a huge source of information and support. We've got thousands of members, and again, you can find the online community on the forum button on our website.
Really friendly and supportive place. If you haven't visited, do go and have a look.
And there are specific areas of the forum for specific groups of patients again, so there is a palliative care section. We have Chat Togethers. So Chat Togethers are our online, sort of a mini online support group where you would sign up and you would join a group of other people in a similar situation to yourself. You would meet every week for an hour on Zoom. The group is run by a trained volunteer. We have some brilliant volunteers running those groups, and you can see that we've got a number of those Chat Togethers planned for the coming weeks. We've got an advanced bowel cancer one starting on the 15th, a stoma one for stages 1 to 3, and then if you are in Wales, and we did have somebody, I think
we did
in Wales, there is a specific one for our Welsh community, and again, you can find details of that on our website. We also have a huge directory of health information, so like the ones that Nadia was highlighting from Marie Curie. We at Bowel Cancer UK have bowel cancer specific resources. You can order some of our publications to have them posted out to you for free, or you can read them online, or you can download them and maybe print them at home. On a huge range of topics, all the way through from diagnosis through to thinking about end of life. And again, available on our website. Oh, what's your Welsh like?
Not that good.
Not good enough. Luckily, there's an English translation. So we also, as we have a piece of work that's funded specifically to work in Wales, and we offer lots of specific services for our community members living in Wales. So if you want to get more involved and you are in Wales or are Welsh, then again, you can search for the Wales page on our website and find out how you can get involved with what we have happening in Wales. And that's it.
Yeah, so lots of ways that we can support. And our website really is worth a look because there's an awful lot going on there. You'll see lots of other people's stories as well that they've shared online, and everything that Catherine mentioned you can access through the website.
And that brings us really close to the end of today. A huge thank you to all of our speakers. Shall we see if we can Can we name them? There were 2 Sarahs.
2 Sarahs.
There was
Yes.
another Catherine.
Another Catherine.
There was a Howard.
Yes.
There was a...
Well, we had Nadia just now.
We had Nadia. We had
Yes.
Lizzie.
Yes.
And Hina. So I think, is that all of us? I think that we read. So huge thank you to all of our speakers, and a huge thank you to those of you who have joined us for either some or all of today. As we said right at the very start, it's not easy stuff to talk about.
No, it isn't, but it's so important to do it. And I think that's something that we've heard over and over again today, haven't we? So thank you to everyone for joining us. And if you've joined us live, or maybe you're watching this back on YouTube at some point in the future, we hope that it's been really useful and you've got a lot from today.
There will be, as we said at the beginning, there will be an evaluation. Oh, look at that. It's like magic. There will be an evaluation survey being sent out. There is a link appearing. It's appeared right now in the chat, which we would love you to fill out. But that's it.
That's it from us.
From us.
So do enjoy the rest of your Saturday, wherever you are in the UK. And we hope to see you at another one of our events very soon.
All the best. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.